3 women who claim they've been held as slaves in a home in London for at least 30 years.
They operated for over 30 years in the middle of London. And on top of all of that, she stole babies. Yeah, I'm just going to drop that on you right now. She stole babies. She stole babies.
Why did you do that?
I love children.
So think of the worst thing in your head right now, multiply that by 100, and we have today's case.
Car sa puissance de sa colère va tout détruire ce que votre œil peut voir maintenant.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Oh my god, I am not ready for today's video. Oh my god. You guys need to prepare yourselves for this one. It's a crazy one. So today we're doing a cult, and this is my first cult that I've done. And it is, in a lot of sense, a very typical cult story. There's a crazy cult leader, they're hiding out in some mountains. But in this cult, there are some of the most sadistic, violent acts I've ever heard. And I really do need to give a disclaimer for this video, and I do not give this lightly. This video is not for the faint-hearted. This is 100% the worst case I've ever covered on my channel so far. But not only that, I truly think that this might be the worst case I've ever heard of. Some of the things that happen in this case have truly disturbed me. This case is not going to be for everyone, and I can completely understand that. So think of the worst thing in your head right now, multiply that by 100, and we have today's case. So if that's not for you, then maybe leave this video right now. I'm not going to gloss over anything. I'm going to include every single thing that I can, because at the end of the day, this really happened. This is real life, and I cover true crime on this channel, so I'm going to include everything. So there's your warning. So prepare yourselves for this one, and don't eat. I know some of you like that challenge to see if you can keep eating when I'm covering these cases, but I'm warning you, you shouldn't eat with this one, so don't blame me, okay? So today's story is the cult of the Anthill Kids and their cult leader, Rock Terrio. I have no words for him, like literally, I cannot think of words crazy enough to describe that man.
Car sa puissance de sa colère va tout détruire ce que votre œil peut voir maintenant.
And I only came across this story recently, and when I heard it, I was like, oh my god, why does this case not have more coverage? And it surprised me that it's taken me this long to hear this story. I mean, everyone talks about Charles Manson and Jim Jones, but why does no one talk about Rock Terrio? Because I'm sorry, but Charles Manson and Jim Jones, I don't think they've got anything on Rock. So Rock Terrio was born on the 16th of May, 1947, making him a Taurus. And I know you've all been waiting for a Taurus case. Rock was born, and he also grew up in Quebec, Canada. Yes, we are finally doing a Canadian case today. And I almost feel bad that this is my first Canadian case because it's so terrible. So I apologize that the first time we visited Canada on this channel, we've gone to probably the worst case possible. And even though I said that the case of the Anthill Kids hasn't had much coverage, I do think it's pretty well known in Canada. I think Rock Terrio is like one of the most notorious criminals, murderers in Canada. So all of my Canadian friends, let me know, like, is Rock Terrio and the Anthill Kids, is it well known in Canada? And for all of you watching that are not from Canada, let me know, have you heard of this case before, or was I just living under a rock all my life? And I've literally just clocked onto the fact that I said living under a rock and his name's Rock. So Rock's parents were French Canadian. They were also devout Catholics, and they had 8 children, and Rock was the second eldest child. And as a child, Rock has been described as very outgoing, very eager to learn, and also very intelligent. But despite his high intelligence, Rock did leave school after 7th grade, and he would have been about 13 at this point, and I couldn't exactly find out why. I did see some sources that said that the school that Rock went to never actually went above 7th grade, so that could be why. But regardless, he did leave school at 7th grade, and his parents didn't make any attempt to get him further education in any way. Unfortunately, because I feel like out of all the cases, I'd like to know what Rock's childhood was like, but we don't really know much about Rock's childhood, apart from the fact that he has said that it was an abusive one. And the neighbours at the time as well have also reported that the household, Rock's household, was an abusive one. It's said that when Rock was a child, Rock's dad made Rock and his brothers play a game called Bone. And as part of this game, Rock, his brothers, and his dad would all sit around the kitchen table. Each of them would have heavy boots on. I can imagine they're the ones with the steel cap, and they would take it in turns to kick each other in the shins. I mean, when you hit your shin on anything, it's painful. But can you imagine being kicked with one of those heavy, like steel cap toe work boots? It doesn't sound like a very fun game, that's all I'm gonna say. It's also reported that Rock's dad made Rock go door to door campaigning for the religious organization that Rock's dad was a part of, which is known as the White Berets. And Rock absolutely hated this. He felt so embarrassed, and other kids would also pick on him for doing this. And it's said that because his dad made him do this, this is where Rock's hatred and resentment for his religion began. Now, as a teenager, Rock has been described as actually pretty popular, which to be honest doesn't surprise me because he's a cult leader and they're always charismatic, aren't they? Well, Rock has been described as a smooth talker. He was very charismatic, and apparently he was very good with the ladies. And apparently a lot of girls found him quite attractive, and he had piercing blue eyes. I mean, I personally don't see it, but each to their own. And like I said, it's quite common, isn't it, for cult leaders to be very charismatic, very charming. And it was around this period of Rock's life where he started to hone his skills as a potential cult leader, let's just say. He always thrived in a larger group. He was always the one that kind of took the lead in a larger group as well. Okay, we're going to jump forward a little bit now because, like I said, not much is really known about Rock's childhood other than the things that I've just told you. So it's 1967 now. Rock is currently 21 years old. And this is when Rock marries his first wife, Francine, who is currently 17 years old at this point. And they do go on to have 2 children together. And at this point in Rock's life, it's pretty normal. Rock supported his family financially by selling wood carvings that he made. He used to carve things like beer mugs from trees, ornate clocks, and like little ornaments and stuff like that. And like I said, Rock's life was pretty normal. Probably out of his whole life, even his childhood, at this point in his life was probably the most normal, even though it's like, what is normal? But you know what I mean. He's not a crazy cult leader. But of course, that doesn't exactly last for long, does it? Friends that were around Rock describe that his behavior started to become more and more erratic. And it seems that one of the triggers of Rock's erratic behavior was that he suffered from quite a few health problems. Rock began to suffer from quite severe abdominal pain, and he was diagnosed with severe stomach ulcers. He did go on to have multiple surgeries to fix this. And I don't know anything about stomach ulcers. I don't know anything about the surgeries, but from what I read, these are pretty big, serious surgeries. I think he had to have some of his stomach removed, and after these surgeries, Rock was left in excruciating pain. And unfortunately, these surgeries didn't go to plan. They didn't exactly go well because after the surgeries, Rock was left with something called dumping syndrome, which, side note, lovely name. Could no one think of a better name for it? And apparently dumping syndrome can occur after someone has had stomach surgeries. And it basically just means that food moves too quickly from your stomach, like through your intestines. But again, I don't really know much about the medical profession, so that may be wrong. And after these surgeries, Rock did become quite distrustful of the medical profession, which led to him almost becoming obsessed. And I truly mean obsessed with medicine and textbooks and trying to learn everything himself. He also started almost preaching, but we'll say lecturing. He almost started to lecture pretty much everyone around him about all of this medical stuff that he was finding out. So Rock is also obsessive and he's preaching. That also kind of sounds like a typical cult leader. So because of all of the excruciating pain that Rock was left in, he did turn to drugs and alcohol to help him cope with the pain, and this did lead to addiction. He also started to get angry a lot, and I don't know, but I can imagine he was probably a pretty angry person before all these surgeries, but this is where his anger starts to really escalate, especially with his wife, Francine. They were also in quite a bit of financial trouble as well. I think Rock was struggling with his job, selling those wood carvings. I don't think he was doing as well as he always was. And then to top it all off, Rock starts to have an affair with another woman. And not too long after the affair started, Francine was just like, you know what? I'm out. I'm not dealing with this anymore. And after being married to Rock for 7 years, Rock and Francine do get divorced. So Rock is currently in his late 20s at this point, and then he does go on to marry the woman that he had an affair with. Her name is Giselle. And at this point as well, this is something that I just don't understand, because he has a resentment towards religion. But at this point in his life, he started to almost become obsessed with religion. And he threw himself into reading as many books as he could on religion. And then all of a sudden as well, he started to become obsessed with his health. Rock was drinking quite heavily. He was abusing drugs. He wasn't living the healthiest lifestyle. And then all of a sudden, like overnight, like a light switch, he started to become obsessed with his health. So he gave up drink, he gave up drugs. He also started to eat healthier as well. And then Rock became a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's said that he was attracted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church because he believed in a lot of the same things, such as healthy eating, no drinking, no smoking. So after joining the church, Rock starts to go out campaigning for them, which I did think was a little bit weird, because that's basically what his dad made him do and he hated that, but that is what he does. And he pretty much instantly becomes an instant star in the church. He has been described as a brilliant salesman because, no surprise, he had a very charismatic personality. And when he went door to door campaigning, he was able to attract a lot of people to the church. He also did give out sermons himself at the church, and he started to gain quite a large following. And I think this is quite a significant turning point, to be honest, because Rock's ego goes through the roof. He loved all of this new attention that he was getting, and the messages that he was delivering were just escalating more and more. So one time when Rock was on a retreat with the church, he was obviously with a lot of other people. When he went on this retreat, I think it was like in the mountains somewhere, he went off on his own. He went for his own little hike, and when he was on this hike, he told everyone that he had a vision from God. And from this moment onwards, Rock believed that he was a messenger of God. So of course, naturally, he tells everyone and anyone that would listen that he is a messenger of God. He also starts spreading a message of an upcoming apocalypse. I mean, we've never heard that before in a cult, have we? But not only was there an apocalypse approaching, Rock Terrio also declared that he had powers to heal people. That sounds very Jim Jones of him, doesn't it? So Rock, with his God complex, truly believed that he could cure people. And I sometimes think, like, did he really believe that? Or did he just make other people believe that? Like, sometimes I think, like, how can they actually believe that about themselves? So Rock does put to the test his ability to heal people, and very sadly, it does not end well. So there was this woman called Geraldine, and she had leukemia, and she was receiving treatment for leukemia in a proper hospital. But then Geraldine's husband kind of fell in with Rock, and Rock obviously started telling Geraldine's husband that he could cure people and that he would be able to cure Geraldine. So Geraldine went to Rock's clinic, and he prescribed her grape juice and organic food, and he said that would cure her leukemia, but obviously it didn't, and very sadly Geraldine died. And obviously this didn't exactly go to plan for Rock, did he? Because he was telling all of his followers that he could cure people, that he could heal people. So to keep up appearances, essentially, he did tell all of his followers and the people that believed in him that when Geraldine had died, he went into her room, he kissed her on the forehead, because he does have the powers to bring people back to life. He did actually bring Geraldine back to life, but then God spoke to him and told him that it was Geraldine's time to go, and therefore Rock had to let her go. And these were the kinds of stories that Rock would tell people, and people believed him. So as Rock continued to expand his following in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and spreading his extreme messages, tensions did start to form. Rock essentially tried to take leadership of the church himself, but the other church leaders were not having any of this, and Rock was kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this is pretty much when the cult begins. I mean, technically it was already beginning when he was a part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but this is where it truly begins. So once Rock was kicked out of the church, he started gathering all of his loyal followers that he had gained in the church and pretty much convinced them to just get up and leave their lives behind and follow him. He convinced people to leave their jobs, leave the education that they were in. He said that nobody needed education because Christ was coming and the world was already doomed and you didn't need education because the world was ending. He also convinced people to just leave their families, cut them off completely, no contact. And it's just crazy, isn't it? The power that Rock has. But this is like all cult leaders. It just is so baffling, isn't it? How much power they do have over people. Friends and family members of Rock's followers did try their hardest to convince their family member not to follow Rock. But the love and devotion that Rock's followers already had for Rock was just too deep at this point. And something that I couldn't find for certain, and to be honest, numbers are a little bit wishy-washy throughout this whole story. I couldn't find exactly how many people did follow Rock, like just give up their lives and follow him. But it was approximately 13 adults at the very beginning, 4 men and 9 women. There was also around 10 children as well that obviously they didn't choose to follow Rock, their parents did, aging from 1 to 15. And Giselle, if you remember, is Rock's second wife. She is one of the women that joined Rock's cult. So since the death of Geraldine, this is when Rock did come onto the radar of the police. They were aware of Rock and his clinic. And Rock became aware that the police were aware of him and he thought that they needed to pack up and leave. Even though the police were aware of him, and obviously the death of Geraldine, they didn't actually have enough evidence to arrest Rock at this point, by the way. So Rock convinces everyone that they need to get up and leave, and this is what they do. They do travel around for a while, but Rock wants to find somewhere to settle down permanently. And this is when they decide to settle into a mountainside called Eternal Mountain. And I'm pretty sure that Rock was the one that named it Eternal Mountain, but I could be wrong there. And Eternal Mountain was located in the Gasp Peninsula. I don't know if that is how you pronounce it. In Canada. They basically chose this location because it's in the middle of nowhere. You know, I like to go onto Google Maps, so I did drop my little man and yeah, it's in the middle of nowhere. It is ridiculously remote. There is just miles and miles of forest. Pretty much the perfect location for a cult. And this is where Rock really embraced becoming the cult leader that he was clearly always meant to be. So he told his commune that the end of the world was coming, and it was actually coming in February 1979, which was only a few months away at this point. And in order to survive this apocalypse, the end of the world coming, they needed to live out in this remote location under Rock's rule. So Rock made his followers build a camp from scratch. They had to build tents, build log cabins, they also had to find food, and Rock just sat on his ass and did nothing. Rock even had the cheek to say that when he was observing his followers doing all of this hard work, they looked like ants. And this is when Rock gave his commune the name of the Ant Hill Kids. Rock did make all of his followers wear the same uniform. He also rationed everyone's food. Not for himself though, he got to eat whatever he wanted, but everyone else had to have food rations. And if they ever complained that they were hungry, that meant that they got even less food. He also gave every single person in his cult a new name, basically to strip them of their identity, but he gave them all biblical names. And Rock himself believed that he was the incarnation of Moses, so that was the name that he gave himself. And he demanded that the commune gave him the respect that came with that title. And then in true cult leader fashion, Rock decided that he needed to have multiple wives. So he married every single woman on the commune. And then one by one, each of the wives fell pregnant. Literally, it's like someone was pregnant all the time. There was at least one person pregnant with Rock's child. And throughout the duration of the cult, Rock went on to have 22 children with 8 women. And of course, Rock's leadership becomes more violent, more erratic as time goes on. He started drinking alcohol again, started drinking a lot because obviously he'd previously given it up. And he still preached to his followers that they were not allowed to drink alcohol, but obviously he's special, isn't he? And Rock is obviously a very violent person anyway, but you add alcohol into the mix and it makes everything worse. And a lot of the extreme acts that we are going to cover in a second do happen when Rock is drunk. So when all of this is kind of happening, it's late 70s right now, and Jim Jones and Jonestown and all of that is coming to a head, let's just say. And Rock is following the story very closely in the media, which I found really interesting. Not that it really adds anything to the story, but I just thought it was kind of interesting that Rock is following the story of Jim Jones, maybe even taking some inspiration, who knows. So the rules that the commune had to abide by were becoming more and more irrational as time was going on. No surprise here from me anyway, but Rock banned all of the followers from ever contacting the outside world. What is also really strange is that the members of the cult were not allowed to speak to each other unless Rock was present. As well, Rock had pretty much complete control over every single thing that his followers would do. So Rock really has become that typical cult leader. And the book that I've been listening to on cults did discuss the key characteristics of a cult leader. So I just want to discuss those really quickly because Rock pretty much does meet all of these characteristics. So the characteristics are: the leader has complete authority without any accountability. The leader defines what is right and wrong. The members of the cult as well are also expected to abandon their own morals and beliefs and adopt those of the cult leader. The leader also deliberately isolates the members of the cult from the outside world. They completely control the environment that the members live in, and pretty much every member cannot have contact with anyone that the cult leader disapproves of. There is also no such thing as privacy for the members of the cult. Like literally, the leader of the cult knows everything. And also the leader of the cult preaches about how terrible the outside world is. And a lot of the time cult leaders try and say that impending doom is upon them. And I think it's safe to say that Rock ticks off every single one of those. So the commune are living under Rock's leadership for a few months, and then February 1979 rolls around, and if you remember, that is the time that Rock said the world was going to end. But obviously February 1979 comes and goes, and the world is still intact. So of course Rock has a little story to get out of this. We all know that Rock is saying that he is a messenger of God, and he said that it is tricky business to decipher those messages from God, and sometimes you can get the dates wrong because time moves differently for God as it does for people on earth. And of course, some of his followers believed every single word of this, but there were a few that started to question him. And Rock saw that some people were questioning him, and he had to maintain his control. He had to maintain his dominance. And how did he do this? Through violence. And this is where it starts to escalate, and I do have to give you all a warning now. So Rock would start to inflict punishment on the members that he thought were straying away from him. If someone wanted to leave the commune, he would hit them with a hammer or a belt. Sometimes as well, he would suspend members from the ceiling, and then sometimes when he would suspend people from the ceiling, he would get other members to pluck out all of their body hair individually, and then sometimes Rock would also defecate on some of them. One of his favorite things to do was to get the members of the cult to inflict violence on themselves. Sometimes he would make members break their own legs with sledgehammers. He would also make members sit on hot stoves. He would also make members shoot each other in the shoulder. And then sometimes he would even make the members eat dead mice and feces as a punishment. He would also force members to cut off other members' toes with wire cutters to prove their loyalty to Rock. And sometimes Rock would also sexually abuse the children as well. And what he did to the children in the commune, I mean, what he did to everyone is absolutely, it's hard to even think about. And then also with the children, he would sometimes nail them to a tree by their clothes. And then he would get the other children in the commune to throw stones at the child nailed to the tree. And I want to stress this, we are still only at the tip of the iceberg. Everything that I have just said is nothing compared to what is to come. But this is just in the beginning of the cult, because obviously it escalates, doesn't it? And when Rock does carry out this violence, quite often the next day he would break down crying. He would beg God to stop using him as a vehicle to carry out God's cruel justice. And I just think that this is so manipulative. Like, I don't believe this for a second. Like, those are crocodile tears. And I wonder what the state of mind was of the members. Also in the cult book that I've been listening to, it says that cult members are often very vulnerable and they also don't feel very good about themselves, and that they always feel like they need to prove themselves to the cult leader. They always need to impress them. And I definitely think that is what is happening here. And it's said that a lot of the members of the Anthill Kids cult were very vulnerable before they joined. They suffered with loneliness. Some of them suffered with depression. They felt worthless. They had a lot of self-doubt, and Rock knew this. I mean, of course, some members of the cult were loyal to him and were completely under his spell and would do absolutely anything that he said. But of course, there are other members that are not under his spell and are just there because they feel trapped and they feel like they can't get away. And I think it's just really easy sometimes to dehumanize the members of a cult, because you just think, oh, well, they're in a cult, they're violent people, or they have crazy beliefs, or this and that. And it's not always that simple. And somehow all of this violence and abuse went completely unnoticed for around 3 years until 1981. And this is around 3 years after the Commune started. And tragically, there is a death. And finally, the authorities start paying attention to the Anthill Kids cult. So this all started when a man called Guy Vere joined the cult. Now, he joined the cult after he saw Rock appear in an article. Oh yeah, the media actually used to sometimes write about Rock and refer to him as a gentle mountain man. He's anything but gentle. And clearly this appealed to Guy, and he wandered off into the wilderness around where the cult was, and he found them and he joined the cult. So when Guy joins the cult, he is given the job of being the babysitter, but he is only allowed to babysit the children that are not Rock's own biological children. Rock definitely treats the children that are his own, his biological children, and the children that are not his very differently, by the way. So Guy is babysitting the children, and one of the children starts crying and would not stop. And Guy is clearly quite violent himself as well. He beats up this 2-year-old child because they would not stop crying. And the little boy, his name is Samuel, he does suffer quite substantial injuries. Of course he does. I mean, he's 2 and this grown-ass man has beat him up. And I don't know the exact injuries of Samuel, but one of the injuries that he had left Samuel unable to urinate. Rock realizes that Samuel is having trouble urinating. And we all know what Rock is like. He thinks that he can cure people. With no medical education or experience or anything like that, decides to operate on little Samuel. Rock carried out his own operation on Samuel to try and help relieve Samuel's problems and help him urinate. He carried out this operation with a pair of scissors, but tragically, little Samuel did not make it through the operation. The exact cause of death is not actually known, but it was found that Rock had poured rubbing alcohol down Samuel's throat as an anesthetic. And it's thought that Samuel did suffer from alcohol poisoning from the rubbing alcohol. And this just really hit me, because this little boy is 2 years old. Why is he being dragged into all of this? And it just breaks my heart that Samuel was born into this cult. But there are so many children being born into this cult and know nothing else but the violent hand of Rock. But of course, Rock did not take any responsibility for the murder of Samuel. He blamed the other man, Guy, for beating up Samuel. So he thinks that the other man needs to be punished for what he's done. Rock actually does hold a trial for Guy to see if he's guilty or not for the murder of Samuel, even though I don't know why he did this, because the trial wouldn't exactly be fair, would it? Because none of the followers are going to go up against Rock. And of course, he was found guilty and he was found that he should be punished for his crimes. So the punishment that Rock decided to carry out on Guy was castration. But what is even crazier is that Rock convinced Guy that this was a good idea. Apparently, Guy was suffering from headaches prior to this, and Rock convinced him that if he castrated him, it would cure his headaches. Don't know how one is linked to the other. And unbelievably, Guy signed a consent form to allow Rock to castrate him. I mean, I don't know about Canadian law, but in the UK, that consent form would be null and void because you can't consent to something like that. So Rock got Guy to lie on the kitchen table whilst the other members fetched all of the medical instruments that he would need. And the instruments that Rock needed were an elastic band, a razor blade, tweezers, and a magnifying glass. When I was reading this, I was just like, what? He's gonna castrate this man with a razor blade and tweezers? And then, obviously, after he castrates Guy, he places the testicles in a Kleenex and just throws them away. And Guy's scrotum bled for 1 week. But incredibly, I don't know how, he survived this operation that Rock carried out on him. To recover from this operation, Guy was given a saltwater compress every 20 minutes, and he was also given plenty of iron in his diet to recover. So following this operation, and once he had recovered, Guy did escape from the commune. I don't think he was too happy about the operation, which, to be honest, I can't say I blame him. So when he escaped, he was able to tell authorities about what was going on at the commune. And of course, he told them about the death of Samuel. And this was what the authorities needed to finally arrest Rock. So the commune was raided. Rock was arrested for his part in the murder of Samuel. Some of the other members as well were arrested for their part in Samuel's murder. And then some of the children, not all of them, but some of them were also taken away and rehomed. And that was roughly about 20 children. So Rock is now arrested. He does go to prison for his crimes, and this should be the end of the story. But it's not. Rock only ended up serving 14 months for his crimes. And he wasn't actually charged with murder. No, he was charged with criminal negligence. Don't know how they got to that offence. And then after the 14 months, he was just released. And things went back to the way they were before, which is just insane to me. Some of the other followers as well that were arrested also did serve prison time, but none of them served longer than Rock. So basically none of them served any time at all. So not long after Rock was released from prison, he decides to move the Anthill Kids to a different location because most of the members had stayed loyal. Don't know why, but they did. So the new location is near Burnt River in Ontario. And this is now 1964 when all of this is going on. So roughly around 6 years after Rock first started the commune. And like I said, things pretty much carried on the exact same. The only difference was that they were in a different location. And if it can be possible, things get even crazier than they were before. Rock would now make the members fight gladiator style for his own amusement. He would draw a large square in the dirt. He would then order 2 members, man or woman, didn't really matter, to strip naked, step inside the square, and then fight for 3 minutes straight. No rules, could do whatever you want. Another thing that Rock liked to do for his own amusement was that he liked to take 2 of his wives to bed and hold competitions to see which one would have the most orgasms. And just like before, this commune in Burnt River was allowed to just go on without any intervention from anyone. And tragically, there was another death of a child at the Burnt River location. It's reported that a newborn baby was just left outside overnight in a wheelbarrow. And this is in the winter in Canada. So the freezing temperatures meant that the newborn baby froze to death. Now, Rock had always hated this newborn baby. This was his biological child, but he believed that this child bore the mark of the devil. And it was actually the mother's idea to leave the baby outside overnight to freeze to death as an act of mercy, which is crazy that the mother thought that that was an act of mercy. Obviously, it wasn't. I'm not saying that the murder was okay or not, but I'm just trying to put myself into the mother's mindset. And if she thinks that allowing her child to freeze to death is a better option than allowing that child to live under Rock's rule, with Rock hating that child, is insane. And eventually authorities did become aware of the conditions of the commune, and they did become increasingly concerned about the children. So in 1985, authorities did raid the commune again, and they seized all 14 children that were there. And from this moment onwards, whenever a child was born in the commune, authorities would come immediately and remove that child, which, to be honest, thank God. And apparently, once all of the children were gone, this is when things started to spiral even more out of control. I know, it's like, how much more out of control can things get? So at this point, some of the adult members, because obviously there's only adult members left, they did try and escape. They didn't want to be there anymore. But unfortunately, no one was ever successful. One of the adults that tried to escape was Giselle. Remember Giselle? She was Rock's second wife. And when Rock found out that Giselle had tried to leave, he threw a hunting knife at her, which landed in her thigh and created a wound that was 3 inches deep, and immediately it began pouring blood. And Rock's response to this was to go get another beer and go to sleep. And then when he woke up, he decided, you know what? I'm going to operate on Giselle's leg. I mean, this was a few hours after the original injury happened, and Giselle's leg had formed a clot and had begun to swell. So Rock pressed on Giselle's leg until the wound reopened, and then he started to poke at the open wound with a red hot iron file. And then he would repeatedly pour cup after cup of boiling hot water on Giselle's leg. He then filled up the wound with salt and olive oil, but Giselle did survive, and a few days later, after her wound had started to heal a bit, she did try and escape again, but again, she was unsuccessful. Another time, one of Rock's other wives, Nicole, she was 3 months pregnant. Rock completely beat her up, punched her repeatedly in the stomach, and this caused her to miscarry. And on another occasion, Rock also shot Nicole through her shoulder. And at another time, when she actually did give birth to one of Rock's children, when she had given birth, Rock got a blowtorch and used it on her stomach. This doesn't even seem real. Out of all the cases that I've covered, this one just doesn't seem real. It seems like it's made up, it's fictional. Like, how can one human do this to another human? Rock also ran that blowtorch that he used on Nicole's stomach. He also liked to use that on other members as well. And there was one woman that he used the blowtorch on her back until her skin bubbled. Other women also had their nipples squeezed in vice grips until they bled. One of the men in the group, his name was Claude, suffered absolutely horrific treatment. One time, Claude was tied up and suspended from the ceiling. He was left there for an hour. Rock then ordered his wives to pluck out all of his pubic hair one by one, and then Rock poured boiling hot water all over Claude. On another occasion, Rock pulled out 11 of Claude's teeth, with a pair of pliers. He also broke each one of his toes one by hand, sliced his arm open with a piece of glass, and Rock also got one of his wives to break Claude's leg with a sledgehammer. And it's like, when you hear this, like, because all of that happened to one person, how did they survive? And that's not all that happened to Claude. The last thing that happened to Claude has truly disturbed me. Oh God, brace yourselves. Oh my God, I've got to pull myself together. It's actually horrible. In another incident, Rock decided to punish Claude for an unknown reason. We don't know why. So as punishment, Claude was ordered to walk around with an elastic band wrapped tightly around his testicles. He was ordered to keep this elastic band on overnight, which apparently made one of his testicles swell to the size of an orange. And this caused irreparable damage. And what did Rock decide to do that following morning? He decided to operate. Rock made an incision into Claude's scrotum. He removed one of his testicles and then cauterized the wound with a hot iron. I can't believe I've just said that. That actually happened to a human being. But unfortunately, Rock wasn't done with the surgeries just yet, and tragically, the next surgery would end up in another death. So we're now in 1989. This is 11 years after the Communists first started. And this is when a woman in the group, her name is Solange, she starts to complain of stomach pains. And again, Rock thinks that the best solution is for him to operate. He lay Solange naked on a table. He punched her in the stomach. He then forced a plastic tube into her rectum to perform an enema with molasses and olive oil. He then cut open her stomach and ripped out part of her intestines with his bare hands. He then made another member stitch up Solange's stomach with a needle and thread. And then very shortly after the operation, Solange didn't make it. She didn't survive the procedures carried out on her by Rock. But Rock wasn't done with Solange just yet. This is another one that's just like, I don't even know how to warn you about what's going to come. So Solange was buried, and then Rock started to have dreams about Solange and that he believed that Solange was pregnant with his child. Rock then made members dig up Solange's body. He then made another member perform a post-mortem marriage between him and Solange. And then he started to proclaim to the rest of the group that he had the powers of resurrection and that he could bring Solange back from the dead. And in order to do this, he carried out the most disturbing thing I've ever read. He cut a hole in Solange's skull and then he masturbated onto Solange's brain. And by ejaculating onto her brain, he said that this is how he was going to resurrect Solange. After members realized that Solange was not going to come back to life, she was cremated, but not before Rock could break off one of her rib bones to wear as a necklace. Rock also took some of Solange's ashes and placed them in a jar where he would repeatedly masturbate into this jar because he still believed that he could bring Solange back from the dead. What do I even say? That is the most disturbing and shocking thing I have ever heard another human being do to another human being. It's the most disrespectful thing that I have ever heard of someone doing to a dead body. How does it go through someone's mind to do that? And somehow the horrific murder of Solange went completely unnoticed by the authorities. But thankfully soon things were about to come crashing down on Rock Thériault. And it would be because one of the women, Gabrielle, would blow the whistle on the whole thing. And Gabrielle, by the way, is the mother of the baby that was left outside. So throughout her time at the commune, Gabrielle had suffered some pretty horrific things. One time when Gabrielle had a toothache, Rock thought, well, you know what? The only way to fix this is by pulling out 8 of your teeth. How did he go from 1 to 8. She also suffered welding torch burns to her genitals. I don't really understand this. I mean, I do, but it's kind of hard to describe. But Rock one time stabbed her in the back with a hypodermic needle and then broke off the needle in her back, so the needle was still in her back. Does that make sense? And also Rock cut off one of Gabrielle's fingers with a wire cutter. It seems like absolutely everyone in this commune suffered like serious injuries because of Rock. Also, Gabrielle did attempt to flee the commune one time, and Rock, as punishment, cut off parts of her breast and also smashed her head with the blunt side of an axe. On another occasion, after the terrible conditions that Gabrielle was living in, her uterus actually prolapsed, which meant that her uterus was protruding 3 inches outside of her vagina. And Rock, of course, thinks that he can fix this. So Rock literally punches the uterus back into Gabrielle's body, and then he fashions a wooden cone to plug everything back in. And then before he actually plugged her uterus back in, he actually did try, you know that thing, I don't even know if people do this, but you know where you tie a string around one of your teeth and then you tie it to a door and then you yank the door open? Well, he kind of tried to do this with Gabrielle's uterus. He tied a piece of string around what he could and he tried to yank it out. No. And thankfully, Gabrielle did manage to escape the commune. It was quite a while after all of this happened. I think Gabrielle had to live with her uterus being like this for about a year, but she did manage to escape and she did receive proper medical treatment. But of course, after she got the treatment, she did return to the commune. But there was one incident that did push Gabrielle over the edge. So one of the nights where she was just sat in the commune, Rock was in one of his usual drunken rages, and quite often when Rock would drink, because a lot of the things that he did to the members of his cult, he did when he was drunk. So a lot of the time when he was drunk, members of the commune would actually retreat into the forest to hide from him. But on this occasion, for some reason, Gabrielle stayed behind. And in his drunken state, he remembered that Gabrielle earlier on in that day had complained about a stiff finger. And I think we all by now know what Rock likes to do when someone complains about an issue to do with their body. Rock decides to operate. So Rock told Gabrielle to put her hand on the kitchen table, and he's like looking at her finger and everything, and then all of a sudden he gets a hunting knife and he drives the knife through Gabrielle's hand, essentially pinning her through her hand to the table. And of course, blood starts to pour everywhere, and Rock is just like, I'm gonna leave you there, I want another beer. So Gabrielle is left pinned to this table for 45 minutes before Rock decides to return. And I don't know how, but Gabrielle is still conscious. But unfortunately, her arm has started to turn blue. And Rock goes over to her, sees that her arm is looking blue, and he's like, oh, that's not looking good, is it? And then with a knife, for whatever reason, he just starts to whittle away very slowly at her arm just above her elbow. And he does this until he whittles away her arm down to the bone. And it's reported that Gabrielle did not cry out, shout, scream, nothing. She was silent through this whole thing. And then out of nowhere, Rock pulls out a meat cleaver and cuts off Gabrielle's arm. Rock then cauterized the wound, and amazingly, Gabrielle survived all of this, and she actually has spoken out about her experience in the commune, and she has given interviews.
Gabrielle Lavallée took years to accept the mistake of falling for a false prophet.
I said, I'm going to go there. Who knows? Perhaps there will be a direction for my future, a direction to follow.
She heard a preacher, a man who claimed he was in personal communication with God, a man named Rock Thériault.
Car sa puissance de sa colère va tout détruire ce que votre œil peut voir maintenant.
I felt someone looking at me in such a way that I had the feeling that his look was like transpercing me. I never, felt such a look before. Believe me, I was sure that I would die that night. I was really certain I would die.
A few days after the amputation, Gabrielle does manage to escape the Anthill Kids commune, and she does make her way to a hospital to actually get treated for her arm. And obviously when she gets to the hospital staff are like, what? Of course they know that this is not normal. People don't just turn up to the hospital with their arm chopped off. So of course they inform the police. And finally, this is the downfall of Rock. A warrant is issued for his arrest, thank God. But Rock went on the run. He clearly found out about this. He went on the run and it took the police 6 weeks to find him. I mean, he's in the middle of nowhere, isn't he? But they finally did get him, and he was found guilty of the assault on Gabrielle. And at this point, the police do not know about the murder of Solange. So it's currently 1989, 11 years after Rock Thériault formed the Anthill Kids cult. And he was sentenced to 12 years in prison for the assault on Gabrielle. Some of the other members of the cult as well were also given prison sentences for their participation in the attack on Gabrielle. So yeah, initially the murder of Solange is not known, but when the police start to investigate further, dig around and actually find out what happened at the Anthill Kids cult, this is when they discover the horrific acts that happened to Solange. So Rock was also charged with second-degree murder, even though I think it should have been first degree, but he was charged with second-degree murder. He was thankfully found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison. But even though Rock Thériault was in prison, he still had control over some of his followers. And in particular, 3 of his wives, even though they're not technically legally his wives, did stay loyal to him. He had conjugal visits, I can never say that word, every 6 weeks. And whilst he was in prison, he still ended up having 4 children with the 3 women that were loyal to him. Thankfully, each child was immediately taken off the woman when the child was born, but still, why? Why bring innocent children into the world? It's like, ugh. Why? In 2009, Rock Thériault made headlines because he tried to sell some of his artwork from prison. Apparently, a website called murderauction.com, which calls itself a true crime auction house, was willing to sell Rock's paintings from prison. And the paintings would be marked as artwork from a crazy cult leader. So yeah, that caused a bit of uproar. And I can understand why. And then in 2011, this story does come to an end because Rock Thériault was found dead in his cell. It turns out that his cellmate, who was also a convicted murderer, had clearly had enough of Rock and he stabbed him in the neck. And he immediately admitted to this. It was like he was kind of proud of it, to be honest. He handed himself straight into the guards and said, quote, "That piece of shit is down. Here's the knife, I've sliced him up." And that is the story of Rock Thériault and the Anthill Kids. So can you understand now about why I gave that warning in the beginning? I mean, I haven't heard of every cult in the world. I haven't heard every cult leader. I haven't heard about what they've done. But can it get much worse than Rock Thériault? I mean, the only reason why I can think of why this case may not have received much coverage is that when you think about it, there wasn't that many members. I mean, when you think of Jonestown, I think there was like 900 members of Jonestown. And obviously there wasn't as many deaths in Anthill Kids as maybe some other cults. So maybe that's why, I don't know. But if you're still here at the end of this video, I hope you're okay. I'm really sorry that I told that story. Go watch something happy after this because you need it. Yeah, I need it. I'm going to go watch something happy. I'm going to go watch Parks and Recs or something. Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Oh my God, brace yourselves for this one. This case is intense. The research, oh my God. This case has to be some of my craziest cases that I've covered rolled into one. Today's case is literally a mixture of Rock Thériault from the Anthill Kids, Shelley Notek, and Bala from the crazy British cult, the British cult that didn't really have a name. All of those cases rolled into one, and that is what we have today. Because today we are covering a cult, a crazy cult from Australia. And I'm pretty sure the majority of you will have never heard about this case before. And today's cult is very different from a lot of cults out there. And the main reason why it is so different is because the cult leader is a woman, Anne Hamilton Byrne. And Anne Hamilton Byrne has to be one of the most evil women that has ever come out of Australia. She also has to be one of the most evil mothers, even though she's not really a mother, but she tries to be in a very sick way.
Hamilton Byrne, Mari Moore from Channel 9. You got any comment now about why you kept those children locked away for so long?
And she was in charge of the biggest, most notorious and most evil cult in Australia, known as The Family.
You're not smart enough.
For what?
In your heart.
And Anne, let me just give you a quick rundown. She was incredibly vain. She was yoga loving. Yeah, yoga gets involved in today's case. Of course it does. She was a multi-millionaire and born again Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Do you think you have spiritual powers?
I don't think I have spiritual powers.
And on top of all of that, she stole babies. Yeah, I'm just going to drop that on you right now. She stole babies. She stole babies.
Why did you do that?
I love children.
Because she wanted the perfect little family, aka why the cult is called The Family.
This is the moment of rebirth upon a new planet.
God, I don't even know where to start. You will be infuriated by this case. This case will make your blood boil. You will be so angry, especially at the ending of this case. So we have a hell of a lot to get through today. This is going to be a pretty long video, so let's not delay anymore and let's jump in. Oh, and seeing as we're doing a case from Australia, I feel like it is appropriate again to give the public service announcement to let you all know that I am not from Australia. I know most of you know this by now, but I still do get comments. Where is she from? Is she from Australia? No, I'm sorry, I'm not from Australia, I am British. So Anne Hamilton Byrne was actually born Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards. Yeah, she wasn't even born Anne. She changes her name later on in the case, but I'm just going to call her Anne from the very beginning, otherwise it's going to get confusing. And she was born on the 30th of December 1921, making her a Capricorn. She grew up in a small farming town in Sale, which is just outside of Melbourne in Australia. She lived there with her parents, Florence and Ralph, and she was the oldest out of 7 children. Now, Anne did not have a very happy or stable home life. First of all, her father, Ralph, was absent. He was just nowhere to be seen, really. He had no interest in being a father. He would just show up every now and again, and it literally was like he would show up, get his wife pregnant, and then disappear again. And I'm not even joking there. So growing up, Anne didn't really see her father that much. And then Anne's mom, Florence, she was actually British. She was born in South London, and she had a lot of struggles herself. She was a self-proclaimed medium. She would claim that she could talk to the dead. And she was also diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And for the majority of her life, she was in and out of psychiatric hospitals. And she would be seen out in the streets acting very bizarrely. Like there was one time where she was in the streets and she set her own hair on fire. So Anne's childhood was chaotic and very unstable. And Anne, being the oldest, she actually had to pretty much raise her 6 younger siblings. And she spent most of her childhood in and out of orphanages because her parents just weren't around. And then at the age of 8, Anne enrolled into a primary school in the suburbs of Melbourne. And following this, she pretty much drops off the radar. Like, I actually don't know anything about Anne's childhood from this moment on until she reaches the age of 20. But I do wonder what else happened, because Anne definitely turns into a very, very evil person. So we now get to 1941, and Anne is currently 20 years old. And this is when she decided that she wanted a fresh start. She wanted to move away from her troubled family and start on her own, stand on her own 2 feet, make her own way in life. And she started to fantasize about what her life would be like. She wanted to live a very glamorous life, a very wealthy life. And she started to have this picture of the perfect family. She wanted lots of children. She wanted lots of happy children. She basically was fantasizing about a life that was the complete opposite of her childhood. And it was around the age of 20 that Anne enters into a relationship with a man called Lionel Harris. And the two of them settle down. They buy a really nice house in Victoria. They get married. They have their first child together, which is a daughter called Judith. And you know, Anne seems to be getting everything that she wants. This is her dream. This is what she's been fantasizing about. She has the house, she has the white picket fence, she has the husband, she has the child. But things did not stay like that at all. Because Anne was now in her 30s, and Anne and her husband wanted to adopt a child. They wanted to expand their family. They had arranged an adoption with a local children's home, and Lionel sets off to the children's home to pick up the child. But on his way to pick up the child, he is involved in a car crash and he is killed. I know, it's like, what are the chances? So now, because he has been killed, the children's home, they pull out of the adoption because they don't want a single parent to adopt a child. So literally in an instant, Anne's vision, her whole fantasy has been taken away from her. She's lost her husband and she's also lost a child. She was just inconsolable in grief. She was absolutely devastated that her world had literally crumbled around her. To be honest, I feel like now, just sitting here, I feel like it's now dawning on me that in Anne's mind, she tried to go about adopting children the legal way, the right way, and it didn't work out for her. And I feel like that is actually pretty important. But we are now in the 1960s, and Anne is a bit lost. She doesn't really know what to do with her life. She is now a single parent to her daughter Judith, and she just has no idea where she's supposed to go in life now. What is she supposed to do? Well, she decides to create herself a new identity. Remember, she was born with the name Evelyn. Well, now she was like, I don't want to be Evelyn anymore. I'm going to create this new identity for myself. I am going to become Anne Hamilton. And then second of all, this is when Anne discovered yoga. Oh yeah, this is a yoga cult that we have on our hands today. Why is it always yoga? What is it about yoga and cults? Seriously, guys, if any of you go to yoga class, just be vigilant, please. Please promise me, be vigilant. So this was the 1960s and yoga was becoming the rage in Western countries. And Anne attended her first yoga class and she was hooked. The yoga class was led by a woman who had traveled all over the world and learned yoga from some of the best gurus in India. She had lived in caves and meditated for hours on end. So Anne really threw herself into the yoga world. She started learning about all of these Eastern philosophies, spiritual teachings, about connecting with a higher power. And the more and more that Anne dived into this world, the more obsessed she became. And following this, Anne became a yoga teacher herself. But in Anne's yoga classes, they were a little bit more preachy than maybe your average yoga class. And Anne would preach about all of the things that she had learned about spirituality, about a higher power. And she would fascinate her students because this is something that you need to know about Anne's personality, is that she was very confident. And confidence takes you so far. And Anne's students were pretty much obsessed with her. They would hang on to every single word that she would say. So Anne was a yoga teacher in this yoga school. Would you call it a yoga school? I don't know. But Anne was a yoga teacher for a few years, and as the years went by, let's just say it all went to her head, and her teachings and her preaching would become more and more extreme. And some of her teachings became a little bit controversial. So the yoga school kicked her out. They were like, yeah, Anne, this is not what we do here. Get out. Now, Anne wasn't having any of this. She was like, oh no, you cannot kick me out. If you kick me out, I will start my own yoga school. I'll show all of you. And that is exactly what happened. And this is literally cult 101. This always happens in cults. Well, not all cults, but pretty much all cults. Someone will join a religion or an organization and they'll rise to the top. And then they'll start preaching and their views will start becoming more and more extreme. And then that person will get kicked out of the religion or the organization. And then that person forms their own religion or their own organization, their own secret club. That literally is what happens in every single cult. And that is exactly what is happening now. And this is literally the beginning of Anne's cult. So once Anne had started her own yoga school, or should we just call it a cult from now, the majority of Anne's students followed her. Anne had portrayed herself as this godlike figure. She had managed to captivate her followers. People would hang on her every word. People did think that Anne was a higher being, that she was on a different level to a regular person. And I think it was now that she realized how much power and influence that she could have over people. So first of all, she starts filling her followers' heads with nonsense. Now, this always gets me. I'm like, how the hell did anyone believe this? But she started telling her followers that she was a descendant from French royalty. It's like, how did anyone believe this? But they did. And then second, she really stepped into the occult. She would use Ouija boards with her clients, which you should not mess around with Ouija boards. No. She would teach her clients, I don't know why she's calling them clients, but she would teach her clients about the supernatural. And she would also tell people that she was a medium like her mother and she could contact the dead. And her students really did believe her. They lapped up all of this. Now, Anne would say, I don't know if she used the word immortal, but she definitely would say that she was not going to die, that she would escape death, that she was ever youthful. The fact that she was telling her followers all of this, she needed to kind of keep up the ever youthful look. So she had a lot of plastic surgery. Now, you have to remember that this is the 1960s and plastic surgery, was it even heard about? I don't know. People didn't know about it. Like nowadays, we know about it. So when Anne discovered plastic surgery, she used this to her advantage. She had so many facelifts. She had quite a few nose jobs. She would always get Botox and fillers, and she would get a lot of other procedures as well. And she would actually get plastic surgery throughout the whole of this case, but I'm not going to keep bringing up, oh, she has another facelift, oh, she has a nose job here. But just know that throughout the whole of this cult, she is constantly getting plastic surgery to make herself look younger, to make people think that she has access to the fountain of youth. And it's crazy because she has so many facelifts. I don't know how many, but I know she has quite a few. And you can see her hairline throughout this video. It gets further and further back. Because again, this is the 1960s and they literally would just pull your face back, and that included your hairline, just pulling it back. I don't know how they do facelifts nowadays, but I feel like they would probably keep your hairline where it is. I don't know. And because her followers didn't know about plastic surgery, that was something that someone could get, they truly did think that Anne was never aging. And then finally, there was one more trick that Anne had up her sleeve to get her followers completely under her control. Anne would convince the women in her yoga classes to leave their husbands. Again, we have to remember the time period that we're in right now, 1960s, and it was frowned upon to get divorced. It was frowned upon to leave your husband. Society would reject you if you had a divorce. At this point as well, because a lot of her cult, she was still teaching yoga and it was pretty much just all women. Only women went to her yoga classes. So the only people in her cult at the moment were women. So Anne was in yoga class and she was listening to her followers complain about their husbands, but they would never leave them. They would never divorce them because it would be frowned upon. They would be shunned from society. But Anne used this to her advantage advantage, she would say to them, leave your husbands, leave them, divorce them, come to me. No one else will accept you, but I will, and you can be happy with me. She would tell her followers that they could be a part of her family. And she has always wanted a big family, hasn't she? And this is where it starts. Be in my family. We can be this one big happy family. And I can't believe this, but her followers, they did leave their husbands, they got divorced, and they went over to Anne. They lived with Anne, they joined the family. So now we get to 1962, and Anne has, I don't know the exact number, but she has quite a few followers in her cult now, but she realizes that there is a problem. All of her followers are women, and she needs men. Again, we have to remember the time period that we're in right now. Women in the 1960s, they didn't have any power. They didn't have any voice. They didn't have any influence. And Anne knew that in order to grow her organization, her group, cult, she needed men. And Anne had the perfect man in mind. She had already set her sights on a very significant person in today's case, and that was Dr. Rayner Johnson. Now, Dr. Rayner Johnson was originally from England. He studied at the University of Oxford, where he graduated with a first-class honours degree, and then he went on to get his PhD in physics. Now, Dr. Rayner Johnson was very intelligent. I cannot stress that enough. And right now he was living in Australia with his family. He worked as a professor and he was head of a college at Melbourne University. And he was in a very, very high up position at this university. He was very powerful. He was very influential. And he had a lot of connections with other very powerful, influential people. So he was of great interest to Anne. But there was one other thing about Dr. Johnson that greatly interested Anne, and that was that he was also interested in the supernatural world. Dr. Johnson was fascinated with the paranormal, with clairvoyance, with Eastern philosophy. And of course, we know that these are all things that Anne is also interested in. So she knew that she would be able to get Dr. Johnson on her side. However, there was one problem. How was she going to get him on board? She had never even spoke to him. She didn't really know him. But Anne knew that she had to have Dr. Johnson because of his position, his power, his influence. He would be the perfect man to help her build this cult, to make it bigger. So she thought, okay, I need to impress this man. I need to impress him and make him join my cult. So I am going to predict his future, because obviously Dr. Johnson was obsessed with clairvoyance. But how was she going to do this? Because she knew nothing about him. Well, Anne obviously had a plan for this. So Anne decides to sleep with Dr. Johnson's gardener, and she was going to sleep with his gardener to get information out of him about Dr. Johnson so then she could predict his future. I know, what the hell? And the gardener literally just spills his guts about Dr. Rayner Johnson, all about him, about his future, about his plans, where he's traveling, etc. And Anne has hit the jackpot. So Anne knocks on the door of Dr. Johnson's home. He opens the door and Anne says to him, "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are. I'm a clairvoyant." And she says to Dr. Johnson, "You and your wife are about to take a trip to India, and your wife will become seriously ill on that trip." So at this point, Dr. Johnson is kind of like, what the hell has just happened? But he does go on a trip with his wife, and his wife does get seriously ill on that trip to India. His wife had developed a severe bad stomach, and she was pretty ill. So Dr. Johnson was like, oh my God, that woman, she was a clairvoyant. She has been able to predict my future. She said that my wife would become ill in India, and she has. I just find this hilarious because Anne's prediction wasn't exactly groundbreaking, was it? It's well known that tourists, when they visit India, they come in contact with bacteria that their bodies are not used to and they become ill. But Dr. Johnson was convinced. He was like, oh my God, I've met a real clairvoyant. Now, even though though Dr. Johnson was very intelligent, there is no denying that he was very naive, he was very gullible, and he wanted to believe in Anne, so he did. He started to believe that Anne was Jesus Christ herself, and he pledged his loyalty to Anne. He would literally follow Anne to the ends of the earth. And this is when Dr. Rayner Johnson became the first male member of the cult. So we now get to 1963, and Dr. Johnson and his wife are full members of the cult. And this is really where the cult starts to expand and become an actual cult. So this is where they give themselves a name, because every cult has to have a name. So it is really Dr. Johnson and Anne, they are kind of co-founders of this cult, and they decide to call their cult the Great White Brotherhood. Yeah, you heard that right. The first name of this cult was the Great White Brotherhood. And they obviously do change their name to the family later down the line. But yeah, the Great White Brotherhood. And following this, Dr. Johnson used his power, his influence, his connections to recruit new members. It really was in the recruitment stage right now. It was grow, grow, grow. Gotta make this cult as big as possible. He was literally on the campaign trail, and he would say that there is this amazing woman teaching yoga. She can perform miracles. And a lot of the connections he had were men, but then these men would go back, they would tell their wives, oh, you should go to this yoga class by this amazing woman who can perform miracles called Anne. And it wasn't long before all of these lawyers, businessmen, politicians, doctors, all of them were attending Anne's yoga classes, and they weren't really even yoga classes right now. They literally would just go and listen to Anne preach that she was the female reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Yep, that is actually what she would say. And she would perform miracles. And how did she perform miracles, you ask? Well, first of all, she had started to get a load of doctors in the cult. And what could doctors do? Get their hands on medication. And she would get these doctors to poison cult members, and they would become really, really ill. And in these sermons, Anne would bring up this patient who was very sick, very ill, and she would cure them, but she wouldn't actually cure them. The doctor would just stop poisoning them. But no one knew that these people were actually being poisoned. So in their eyes, this was a miracle. This person is completely cured. And then there was another huge part of the cult that convinced people that Anne did have powers, and that was drugs. Yeah, there was a lot of drugs in this cult, and a lot of LSD. That was the drug of choice for this cult. Anne had recently recruited a man called Dr. Lance Whitaker, and he was big on LSD, the effects of LSD, what you could do with it, how people would react to it. So when new members joined the cult, they had to go through this initiation ceremony where they were essentially pumped with LSD. They were then left in a dark room, no light, nothing, for hours on end, and they were completely high on LSD. They were completely tripping out, and all of a sudden Anne would appear. She would be dressed in white robes. There would be a single spotlight on her. There would be a smoke machine. I feel like in my head there is also a wind machine, and she would tell new members that she was Jesus Christ. Now you have to remember that the people witnessing this, they are high on LSD, they are completely out of it, and you can picture it, can't you? Anne with her blonde hair billowing in the wind, the smoke machine, the white robes, the single spotlight. And because the new cult members were high on drugs, they believed this. They truly believed that they were having a vision that Anne was Jesus Christ. And it was that simple to convince people that Anne was this almighty being, that she was godlike, that she was the second coming of Jesus. It was literally just drugs. So Anne is really taking advantage of the fact that she has doctors in her cult, and honestly, that is terrifying, but it doesn't end there. Oh no, it gets scarier. So Dr. Johnson introduces a woman to Anne, and her name is Joy, and Joy owns a psychiatric hospital. Now Joy, she was coming to the end of her life, and Anne decided to take advantage of that. Anne worked her magic and managed to get Joy to change her will to leave Anne the psychiatric hospital when she died. I honestly don't know how Anne seems to have this much power and control over people. I mean, when I was doing my research, I kept seeing the same things over and over again. She's very charming and charismatic, and her beauty just transfixes people. So Joy does pass away, and Anne is now the owner of a private psychiatric hospital, and oh boy, does she use this to her advantage. Because you might be thinking, well, what is she planning with the psychiatric hospital? How much damage could she actually cause with that? Well, at this time in Australia, you only needed the signature of 2 doctors to get someone committed to a psychiatric hospital. And guess who Anne has full control over in her cult? Loads of doctors. Meaning that Anne could essentially get any of the doctors that are in her cult, just 2 of them, to sign someone and get them committed, involuntarily committed to this psychiatric hospital. Now, if that is not terrifying, I don't know what is. Because, spoiler, that is exactly what happens to multiple people. Anyone that threatened the cult, anyone that threatened to expose the cult, anyone that disagreed with Anne, or anyone that was going to get in the way of Anne getting what she wanted, would get committed to the hospital. And I truly cannot believe that she was allowed to get away with this. I mean, of course she's allowed to get away with this. She actually has doctors, real doctors, signing these things and getting people committed. So we now get to 1968. The cult, as a proper cult, has been running for approximately 5 years at this point. Anne is currently 47 years old, even though she's telling everyone that she's in her 30s. And this is when a very significant thing happens, because she meets a man called Bill Byrne. Now, Bill was roughly the same age as Anne, her real age. And the moment Anne met Bill, she knew that she had to have him. That was going to be her next husband. However, there was one problem. Bill was already married. Happily married with 4 children. But did this stop Anne? Oh no, of course it didn't, because she had a psychiatric hospital that she would get people committed to. I know, it's unbelievable. So as soon as Anne and Bill met, Bill became infatuated with her. He became obsessed with her. He would do anything for her. And he wanted to leave his wife for Anne. So what did Anne do? She got Bill's wife committed to the psychiatric hospital. Yeah, in order to get rid of Bill's wife, she got her sectioned, and she was pumped full of drugs. She was starved. She was left in a dark room. She had to go through humiliating, degrading, invasive treatments. Treatments that she obviously didn't need either, because there was nothing wrong with her. And Bill left his wife. Just like that, Anne married Anne. And also Bill abandoned his 4 children. He didn't care about them anymore. And when I got to this point in my research about this hospital and about the doctors in the cult and the doctors committing people that don't need to be committed to the psychiatric hospital, I just kept thinking, oh my God, this is a horror film. This literally sounds like American Horror Story Asylum. And I think this is what makes this cult so different to a lot of other cults, because obviously it's very common, of course it is, for the cult leader to have a lot of control over their followers, like Anne does. However, normally the people that are in the cult, that are following the cult leader, don't have that much power or influence or money themselves. But that is what makes this cult different, because the members of Anne's cults are lawyers, doctors, business people, politicians. And it's just scary how one person can control all of these other very powerful, influential people. So now that Anne has her new husband, Bill Byrne, and that's obviously why Anne's name is Anne Hamilton Byrne, the cult continues to grow. And at this point, the cult had grown and now has 500 members. Yeah, this is no little cult. This is a huge cult. 500 members. All middle class, wealthy, powerful, and they would all gather weekly, take LSD, and watch Anne give her rambling sermons that she was powerful, almighty, she could perform miracles, that she was the second coming of Jesus Christ. She would talk about contacting spirits, help people get in contact with their dead loved ones, and her followers would worship her. They would kneel at her feet in admiration. And they did kind of have their little village, this little cult village. village. Most of the cult members bought properties in the same area in a place called Ferny Creek, which is just outside of Melbourne, and all of the cult members would live together in this like little village. It wasn't obviously a dedicated village to this cult, but they would all buy properties in this area. And these houses that the cult members lived in were pretty fancy. Like I said, most of the members were rich. And this is really where this cult that Anne has really does become a cult. Because Anne, she wants to make money. She wants to be wealthy herself. So Anne starts to demand 10% of the wages of all of the cult members, which 10% of approximately 500 cult members adds up, which meant that Anne soon became a multi-millionaire. And finally, something else that Anne did that is just completely classic cult is that she would make the cult members swap spouses. But it's just a complete power trip, isn't it? To make people swap spouses and to have that much control over people is exactly what Anne wanted. And you might be thinking, okay, so why are they doing this? Like, why are they so transfixed by Anne? Why are they completely under her spell? And this is where Anne really did have people convinced that she was the second coming of Jesus Christ. And Anne, in her sermons, would tell people that they had a huge karmic debt and they needed to repay this debt to reach the afterlife, to reach heaven. And if they didn't pay off this debt, they would come back in the next life, and their next life would be worse off than the current life that they have right now. So how did these people repay the debt? Well, that was simple. That was the simplest thing of all. To repay their karmic debt, they just needed to do everything that Anne said. That simple. They just needed to do everything that Anne said. And they thought to get to heaven, they needed to do everything that she wanted. And what would happen if they didn't obey Anne? Well, they would be punished. And their punishments would be either committed to the psychiatric hospital or, and this is just completely sick, they would have brutal operations carried out on them by one of the doctors. Like, there was this one man that wanted to leave the cult, and in order to stop him from doing this, Anne ordered a frontal lobe lobotomy. How are these words coming out of my mouth? How did this actually happen? And I'm sure most of you know what a lobotomy is, but they basically just drilled into the front of his brain, and this changed his personality forever, like completely forever, just because he wanted to leave the cult. And finally, there is one more thing that happened in this cult that really did just make this a classic cult. Anne said the end of the world was happening. Why is it that all cults do this? Yes, this was a doomsday cult as well. Anne told her followers that the apocalypse was approaching. And she really did play on people's fear that nuclear war was about to break out worldwide. Like, people genuinely did believe this. The Cold War was currently going on. There was also the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like, people genuinely did believe that nuclear war was on the brink. And Anne would tell people that if they were in this cult, they would be saved from the apocalypse. But also, after the apocalypse, they would need to repopulate the planet. Could you get more stereotypical cult? I mean, seriously. So in order to repopulate the planet, they needed children, and they needed to create the master race. And this is where we get to the point in the story where Anne's cult really does go into overdrive, because we have talked about so much tragedy already in this case. We have talked about people being committed to a psychiatric hospital, people being operated on just because they want to leave a cult. Well, now we are going to be talking about how Anne stole 28 children. And it was now when Anne started to collect children that she changed the name of the cult to The Family. So we are now entering into the 1970s. Anne is in her 50s. Now, Anne can't have any more children because she's had a hysterectomy and she has one child of her own, but she wants a big family. She wants loads of children. But having children herself wasn't an option. And she wasn't about to go down the legal route again because that didn't pan out very well the last time. So now she's going to steal children. She's going to go down the illegal route and steal them, just take them. And I really do mean just stealing babies. Now, you may have images of Anne literally running around Australia stealing babies, and it didn't quite happen like that because we have to remember I know I'm a broken record, but she has doctors in her cult. And this is what makes this cult so scary. And the way Anne went about stealing these children is honestly just terrifying, because she wanted to do it in a way that she wasn't going to get caught. So her trusty psychiatric hospital comes in handy once again. Because whenever a patient would be in the psychiatric hospital and they were pregnant, Anne would arrange for the doctors at the hospital to deliver the baby and then essentially steal the baby for Anne. Yeah, these poor mothers, most of the time they were teenagers. They were deemed unfit to be a mother because they were a teenager, because they were a single mom having a child out of wedlock. They were in the psychiatric hospital, and because they were deemed unfit to be a mother, their child would be taken away from them. Now, this actually wasn't exclusive just for Anne. This actually did happen. This happened in this country, in the UK as well. It's absolutely disgusting. But Anne would take advantage of the fact that society at the time frowned upon teenage pregnancy and children out of wedlock. So whenever a patient would be in the psychiatric hospital and they were about to give birth, they would give birth and then a pillow would be placed over their head so they didn't even see their baby. The baby would be whisked out the room and then put up for adoption or given to Anne. And that mother would never ever even see her baby. And Anne stole multiple babies this way, taking advantage of vulnerable young mothers. And she didn't just steal babies from her psychiatric hospital. She had a huge network of doctors that would literally keep an eye out for teenage pregnancy. And whenever a teenager would become pregnant, they would essentially try and steal their baby. And in a few instances, they were successful. In Australia, and I'm pretty sure that it happened in the UK as well, when a teenage girl would fall pregnant, they were sent away. So nobody in the neighborhood, the community would know that that girl was pregnant. So they would be sent away to have the baby, and then they would come back childless, and no one would know that they had had a baby. But that baby was then put up for adoption, or in today's case, stolen by Anne. And because she had lawyers on her side as well, the lawyers were able to forge and create birth certificate and adoption records, everything. And then on top of this, because she wanted even more children, whenever any of the cult members would fall pregnant, she would convince them to hand their baby over to her. So the cult members that willingly gave over their children, they would literally from afar watch their own children be raised, but those children wouldn't know that they are their biological parents. Does that make sense? This is crazy. And over the course of the 70s, so over a decade, Anne stole 28 children. 14 of them she stole from the psychiatric hospital or vulnerable young mothers, and the other 14 she stole from other cult members. I just cannot believe this. Now, again, this is nothing uncommon for cults. Pretty much all cults, they want to repopulate the world. The end of the world is happening. They want lots of children. But normally the cult leader is a man, and the man gets lots of the women in the cult pregnant and has multiple children by multiple women at the same time. Whereas Anne, she can't do that. She has to think of a different way to go about this. So she steals them. And these children are raised thinking that Anne is their biological mother and Bill is their biological father. All of the people in the cult, obviously apart from the people that willingly gave over their children and the people that are on the inside helping her, like the doctors and the lawyers, but all of the other members of the cult did believe that these 28 children were biologically Anne's. And in order to keep up this ruse, Anne would be constantly pregnant. She would wear a fake baby bump. She would wear maternity clothes, and people fell for it. She would tell them that she's had lots of sets of twins and triplets to explain the large number of children that she was having.
How many pregnancies do you think she would have gone through?
She seemed to be pregnant all the time. Just one after the other, plus she had triplets.
Did you ever see her actually pregnant?
I never felt her stomach.
And I just don't know how anyone believed that roughly over the space of a decade, Anne popped out 28 children. Now, eventually, when these children grew up, they needed to go to school. And she also had connections in the education system. So Anne decided to open up her own school. So yeah, Anne registered a school at her cult. I feel like I'm speechless so many times in this video, because how was she allowed to get away with this? She opened up her own school, and this is what is so scary about this cult. She has connections in every single industry. And ultimately, this is her goal. This is the goal of the cult for Anne: to become wealthy, to have power, and to have a big family and a lot of children. And right now, she has succeeded in all of that. And it's just crazy that she was able to open up a school and the authorities didn't question anything, because from the outside, it looked legitimate. So now Anne had her perfect little family, but the children, what was life like for these children? Well, as you can imagine, it was absolutely terrible. So first of all, Anne had to figure out where to keep all of these children, because she wanted them kept secret, hidden. So she bought herself a very large property. It was in the middle of some woods, it was right by a lake, and it was really well hidden, and no one could see this property. And she called this property Uptop. And this is where the children were kept, in Uptop. And this was essentially a prison. There was barbed wire fencing all around the property. None of them could escape. They were in the middle of nowhere. But then Anne had another problem on her hand, because she was telling everybody that these children were all hers, that all of these children were siblings. However, they weren't, which meant that they looked different from one another. So Anne decided that she had to make all of the children look alike. They needed to look like siblings. So she decided to dye all of the children's hair platinum blonde. And she gave them all this like similar haircut. It was like a bob. It was like just below the ears. All of the girls had very long hair, and all of the boys had this really short hair, and they were all forced to wear matching clothes. All of the boys would look the same, all of the girls would look the same. It looks like a mixture of the Von Trapp family mixed with the children from the Village of the Damned.
I wanted them to look like brothers and sisters, though. I must admit this. I love them. I love them in their little smocks and jeans and the long hair and ribbons. It was beautiful. It was lovely to see.
And dyeing their hair was a horrible experience for the children because it would burn. Some of the children were allowed to keep their natural colour hair if it was red or like a light browny blonde, because that could pass as a sibling hair colour. But if the child had really dark hair, it had to be dyed. And on top of that, the children had to be given speech lessons where they were forced to practice pronouncing their vowels so they sounded more British than Australian. I don't really know why she wanted her children to have a British accent. I don't know. So now Anne really did have her perfect little family, and she would make these creepy home movies to make it seem like to the outside world she really did have this perfect family.
This is the moment of rebirth upon a new planet. We've received the call, and great things will be done.
She would make all the children run around and laugh and be happy, and she would make the children sing in the choir. And she wanted this perfect family image to recruit more members, because when she was recruiting, she would show them these home videos and say, look at my children, look at the way we're living, look at how happy these children are. But of course, it wasn't perfect. The conditions that these children were living in were absolutely abhorrent. But before we get on to the actual conditions of what the children were living in, I just want to tell you some of the children's names. We don't actually know the identities of all 28 children because they haven't been revealed, but we do know the identities of some of the children. So we have Sarah, who was actually the first child to be stolen. She was taken away from her 15-year-old mom from the psychiatric hospital. Now, she was one of the moms that had the pillow put over her head and her baby taken away from her. We have Leanne as well, who was another one of the older children. Then there was Ben, who was offered up willingly by one of the cult members. Then there was Rebecca, who was Anne's biological grandchild. Now, I don't know any more details than that because obviously Anne does have one biological child called Judith. Now, clearly Judith had had a child, which was Rebecca, but Anne stole her biological grandchild. And then finally, one of the other identities that we do know of the children was Anna-Marie, who was actually stolen from one of Bill's biological sons. So remember, Bill has 4 children that he abandoned as soon as he married Anne. And one of his son's wives got pregnant, and Bill and Anne got that wife committed to the psychiatric hospital, and then they stole her baby. I know we cover some very, very dark cases on this channel, but when we cover things like this, when we cover cults and stealing children, it's just really hard to wrap your head around that this actually happened. So now we need to get back to the conditions that the children were kept in, and I'm going to warn you now, this is not very nice at all. So pretty much the first thing that Anne did to keep control and discipline the children was hire what she called aunties. So these aunties would be just other female cult members. These aunties would be the ones disciplining the children, enforcing the rules, homeschooling the children, living with the children, because Anne never wanted to get her hands dirty, so she hired other people to do it for her. And these aunties would raise the children. They would do everything. And Anne would just pop up every now and again and pretend to be the loving mother. And whenever Anne wanted the children to be disciplined, it was the aunties that carried out the discipline. Now, there was 3 main aunties, but there was more, but there was 3 main ones, and their names were Elizabeth, Trish, and Margot. They were the 3 main ones, but there were other aunties from other cult members. And what is just really crazy is that some of the aunties were the actual biological mothers of some of the children. And the children were subjected to a strict military routine. So for example, 5 a.m, wake up, wash, dress, make beds. 6:30 a.m, 1 hour of yoga. Of course, don't forget that this is a yoga cult. 7:30 a.m, listen to Anne's sermons on tape. Really, they had to do that every day. 7:45 a.m, chanting mantras. 8 a.m, meditation. 8:15 a.m, physical exercise. And then at 8:30 a.m, this is 3.5 hours after the children have woken up. Now they're allowed breakfast. They have already done so much, and now they're only allowed breakfast, which usually was just a few pieces of small fruit. The rest of their day was consisted of schoolwork and chores. They were allowed lunch and dinner, which consisted of steamed vegetables, and then they were forced back in bed by 9 p.m. to do everything all over again the next day. And this is what every day was like, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. For the majority of the time as well, there was no electricity and no running water in Uptop, meaning that there was gas fires for light. They didn't have a toilet that functioned like a normal toilet. They had to manually flush the toilet. They had to wash in buckets. And the children were not allowed access to TV. Obviously, there was no internet, but they were not allowed access to newspapers or books that told them about the outside world. They were so isolated, they had no clue what the world was like. They were forced to sleep in dormitory-style rooms, boys in one room, girls in another. They were also not allowed to be individual. They were not allowed personalities. They were not allowed belongings. And the children, the worst part of all of this, they thought that this was normal. So things have already been pretty bad already, but things are about to get so much worse because we now need to talk about how the children are punished. And given that Anne wanted complete and utter control over these children, if the children ever did step out of line, they would be punished severely. But most of the time, it would be the aunties that would dish out the punishment. Anne, like I said, never wanted to get her hands dirty, even though Anne would sometimes do the punishment. But Anne always wanted to be favoured by the children, so she would never want to punish the children herself. She would always want to make the aunties look bad, even though it was Anne calling all of the shots. So the first thing that the aunties would do to punish the children was to beat them. And these children would get beaten all of the time for the smallest of things. They were beaten if they spoke when they weren't supposed to speak. They would be beaten if they didn't get dressed quick enough. They were also only allowed to go to the toilet at certain times, which resulted in a lot of the time the children wetting themselves. So if the children ever wet themselves, they would be severely beaten. They would also be beaten for the most ridiculous small things as well, like not putting on the cap properly of the toothpaste. They would be beaten if they had messy handwriting. One of the girls was actually starved for 3 days because she wore odd socks. And these beatings were brutal. They would use their hands, but they would also use weapons like canes and metal rulers, shoes, whips, belts, even pieces of wood with nails sticking out of the end. And these children would be covered in bruises and cuts pretty much constantly, because that was the thing as well. There were so many rules and regulations that the children had to abide by, but these rules would change almost on a daily basis. The children would break a rule that they didn't even realize was a rule at the time. There was also a rule that the children couldn't be friendly towards each other. Even though they were supposed to be this big happy family, they were siblings. They were not allowed to form friendships. But if the children ever did become friendly with another child, they would be split up. There were 2 girls, Sarah and Andrea, that were actually forbidden to talk to each other for 1 year. And another thing that was severely punished was bedwetting. The children were actually not allowed to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, and they were so terrified, they were so scared. They were not allowed to wet the bed that inevitably at least one child every single night would wet the bed. Each morning the aunties would get the children up and inspect their beds to see which child had wet the bed. And when a child had wet the bed, they would be dragged by their ear to the bathroom and given an ice cold shower. They were then given a beating, and then they were forced to clean their own dirty sheets. There was one boy that wet the bed so often and was beaten so much that the other children called him Zebra Stripes, because he had so many stripes on the back of his body from being hit with a cane. But it didn't matter what age you were still not allowed to wet yourself, and that included babies. Babies that have no concept of bladder control, nothing. They were still beaten if they wet themselves. It's just, honestly, like, oh God, I feel like I'm getting emotional. Just beating a baby because they've wet themselves. It's like, who the hell does this? And also, like I said, some of these aunties, they would be the biological mothers to some of these children that they were beating. How can they do that? And the older children as well, they were forced to be complicit. They were forced to participate in punishing the younger children. So if a baby did wet themselves, sometimes the older children would be forced to punish the baby. The aunties would force the older child to hold the baby in an ice cold bath, whilst the aunties would hit the babies. I'm sorry, this is a lot, isn't it? And the baby would be screaming. The older children just had to hold the baby in the ice cold bath, and the aunties would say that the babies needed to be taught a lesson. The children were also forced to undergo intense interrogation sessions. If any of the children ever broke one of the rules, for example, breaking an ornament or leaving their bed messy, not making their bed, if the aunties didn't know which child had broken the ornament or left the room a mess, then the aunties would interrogate each child until one of the children would crack and confess either that it was themselves or snitch on one of the other children. But the children always stuck together. They had this code of silence, which meant that all the children were beaten. And these interrogation sessions, they were absolutely disgusting. The aunties would bring all of the children into one room, and they would place a stool in the middle of the room, and one by one they would get each child and put them on the stool and interrogate them and shout in their face like, confess, confess. But the children never did confess, so their pants were pulled down and they were whipped in front of the other children, and the other children had to watch. And if ever any of the children would flinch or look away because they didn't want to see another child being beaten, then they would get beaten. And sometimes Anne would get involved. Anne would sometimes come into the room holding a knife. She would want to know which child had broken the rules. And she would threaten the children with a knife, and she would slam this knife on the table, and she would say, confess. Confess now or I'll cut your bums off. And the children were truly terrified that this was going to happen. They were really scared of Anne. On other occasions, when the children didn't comply, their hands were held over an open flame. They would also get their heads held in a bucket of water until they would confess. They would get the child's head and shove it in the bucket, hold it there for I don't know how long, but a decent amount of time, pull the child's head out of the bucket and would say, "Are you ready to confess yet?" And if the child didn't confess or didn't say anything, their head would be put in the bucket again, and this would continue. The children were also waterboarded. The treatment of these children is beyond disgusting. It's disgusting to think about what Anne and the aunties and Bill, don't forget about Bill, he is there, he's complicit in all of this. They are disgusting people. But it gets worse. It really does. And it's like, how? How does this get worse? Because there was another way that Anne would control the children, and that was by food. Now, I've already told you roughly what the children would eat, but they would eat a couple of pieces of fruit for breakfast, a small plate of steamed vegetables for lunch, and a small plate of steamed vegetables for dinner, and that was it. So that is already not enough for anyone to survive on. They were basically eating nothing. So these children were starving. They pretty much were being starved. There were padlocks on the kitchen cupboards so the children could never access the food. And the aunties would walk around with the keys dangling from their belt to the food cupboards just as an extra form of torment. Anne and the aunties every single day would gather and eat very nice, lavish food, and the children would just have to sit and watch and literally starve. And one of Anne's favourite punishments was to withhold food from the children, and the children would have to scavenge for food. They would look through the bins to eat anything. Some children would find mouldy bread and eat it. One girl actually had to start eating grass and leaves because she was that starving. And then another boy was forced to eat his own feces because he was that hungry. But if that wasn't bad enough, Anne's control over food went further than that because she would make the children be weighed every single day. Every morning after the children were woken up, they would be forced to stand in a line, and one by one they would step on scales. And if any of the children ever put on any weight from the day before, they would be severely beaten, which is insane because these are children. They are growing children. They, of course, are going to put on weight. But Anne was very vain. She was very particular in how she wanted people to look. She would judge people by the way they looked. And she wanted her children to be as skinny and as scrawny and malnourished, really, as possible, especially the girls. She was really hard on the girls. She never wanted the girls to put on any weight. And if any of the children did put on any weight, their food was rationed. They were given half of what they were previously getting, which was still basically nothing. And there is one girl, Cassandra, and her story is just truly heartbreaking because she was a very young child. She was under 10. I don't know her exact age, but she had started to get a distended stomach from malnutrition. Now, the other children knew that this was from malnutrition because the children did have access to textbooks because of their education. They were allowed medical textbooks, and they got their textbooks and they tried to show Anne that her distended stomach was from malnutrition. She wasn't putting on weight. But Anne was not having any of this. She was like, no, Cassandra, she's putting on weight. She's putting on too much weight. So Cassandra's food kept getting restricted even more. And the other children begged Anne. They begged the aunties to give Cassandra more food. But Anne was having none of this, and she said, and I truly cannot believe that she said this, Anne said that Cassandra should never weigh more than 3 stone until she reached the height of 4 foot or more. 3 stone. 3 stone. That is severely underweight. And Cassandra got so malnourished that she was unable to walk. She literally had to crawl around on her stomach. She even started having fits. But Anne and the aunties just ignored this, and they said that Cassandra was crawling around and she was having fits for sympathy. So as well as the starvation, there was also 2 final things that Anne would do to keep control over the children. The first was drugs. Yes, Anne was also putting the children on LSD. Children as young as 8 or 9 were given LSD twice a day. They would have delusions, hallucinations, they would sweat profusely, they would shake, they would hear voices, they would be completely spaced out. And Anne would do this so they were more docile, so she could control them better. And the children were so affected by this, it really did affect their development. Some children would just sit and stare out of the window for hours and just not move. The children, most of the time when they were on LSD, they wouldn't utter a word. Their personalities just gone. They were just empty shells. And then when the children were 14 years old, they had the initiation ceremony, just like the other cult members, where they were pumped full of LSD. They were taken into a dark room for hours, and then Anne would come out with her Jesus Christ act, with her robes and the spotlight and the smoke machine. And then the final thing was targeting the girls, because Anne was always harsher on the girls. It was drummed into the girls that their changing bodies as they were hitting puberty were ugly. And when they started their periods, they were not given any pads or tampons or anything. She would also make the girls feel dirty and sexual. She would go into almost these psychotic outbursts, and she would just start screaming at the girls about their bodies. She would start saying that cancerous tumors were going to grow out of their genitalia. She would accuse the girls of being lesbians if they dressed in a certain way. She would also accuse them of walking a certain way to attract men, and these accusations would start from as young as the age of 5. Imagine shouting at a 5-year-old, saying that the 5-year-old is walking a certain way to attract men. And she very harshly judged the girls by their looks. But if any of the children were deemed more ugly by Anne, they would be treated worse. And then finally, when the children went to bed, quite often the children would rock themselves to sleep as a form of comfort. But Anne would take this as a form of sexual gratification. So if a child was ever caught rocking themselves to sleep, they would be severely beaten. And these children, especially the girls, they grew up absolutely hating themselves, absolutely hating who they were and the way they looked. And they started self-harming because they thought that they deserved it. They would pick at their skin and their skin would become infected. They would hold their breath until they fainted. They would cut themselves with pins and scissors and then rub their wounds in dirt. And then finally, Sarah repeatedly fantasized about poisoning herself with Dettol. So that is what life was like for the children, which obviously we have been talking about the children for a while, but the children are really the main part of this story. But we need to go back to the rest of the cult now. And we are now entering the 80s, and the children have been living in those conditions for about a decade at this point. But Anne in the 80s wanted to expand the cult even more. Now, by this time, Anne had amassed so much money. She was actually worth $50 million. I know, $50 million, and this was all taken from her cult members. And she used her wealth to buy multiple properties all over the world. She had a nice fancy house in the English countryside in Kent. She bought a nice fancy house in upstate New York. She also had another house in London and a house in Hawaii. And she had a few other places around the world. And Anne at this point was just using her money to travel around the world to try and recruit more people from all over the world. Yeah, this cult is now going worldwide. And surprisingly, whenever Anne would travel, she would sometimes take some of the children. Now, of course, this was no holiday for the children. The children were merely taken along to be shown off, because Anne liked to portray that she had this perfect little family. So whenever Anne was going out to recruit new people, she would take the children along, she would put them on a plane, she would fly to one of her houses, the children would be taken off the plane, into the house, locked away in the house, still treated the exact same. The aunties were also with them. They still had the exact same strict military regime, but they were just in a different house. And then when Anne would entertain new people, try to lure new people into the cult, she would get her children out. They would be in their best clothes. They would be lined up, and she would just parade them like a traveling circus. Look at my perfect children all lined up. Look at how well behaved they are. And each children was made to kiss both Anne and Bill on each cheek, which would normally be forbidden because the children were never allowed to show Anne affection. And Anne never showed them any affection either. But in front of guests, they were allowed to show affection because Anne wanted to portray this perfect family. But then Anne would sometimes travel alone because, you know, she needed a break from running this big worldwide cult. It was hard work. And she would leave the children at Uptop with the aunties. But Anne was still sadistic, even though she was thousands of miles away. Because whenever the children were punished, whenever the children were beaten, Anne would phone up and listen. Yeah, she liked to listen to the children crying and screaming in pain. And it's just crazy that this cult just continued on. Whenever Anne was in Australia, she continued to deliver her rambling sermons. The cult members would all take LSD. Dr. Johnson is still really a part of the cult, by the way. He is always there trying to recruit new people, trying to make new connections. And there was new tactics that Anne was using to keep her cult members in line. Because obviously this cult now has been going on for, it's got to be like 20 years at this point. But of course, being in a cult for 20 years, some people are going to wake up and want to leave. However, Anne never allowed that to happen because when she would deliver her sermons, she would give her cult members LSD. And whilst the cult members were high and spaced out, Anne would interrogate them and get them to reveal their deepest, darkest secrets. So whenever these cult members would want to leave, Anne would blackmail them. And I think it's crazy when you think about how many members there are in this cult. We don't know the exact number, but it is 500 plus members. It is so rare that a cult of this size and has been going on for so long has remained hidden. But then again, the motto of the cult was unseen, unknown, unheard. So everything seems to be going great for Anne right now. She has this huge, huge cult. She is a multi-millionaire. She has properties all over the world and she has her perfect little family. But as we move through the 1980s, this is when things would finally start to go downhill. So the first thing that went wrong, this literally shook Anne to her core. A young child in the local area went missing and the kidnapping was blamed on the cult. People in the local area that obviously were not in the cult had started to notice the cult and all of the strange things that were happening. And as soon as this child went missing, they pointed the finger at Anne. Now, Anne didn't actually kidnap this child. I know, shock horror. I bet you were thinking that she did. But no, Anne did not kidnap this child. But regardless, this still brought unwanted attention to Anne and the cult. And the police arrive at Uptop to search the premises. Now, you're probably thinking, great, the police are here. This is when the children get rescued. Unfortunately, that does not happen right now because Anne had prepared for this scenario and she had gotten the aunties to dig out a section of the house that it was kind of like in between the walls and it was known as the hole, and you entered into the hole through a cupboard. And then it was just the space in between the walls. It was very small, very cramped. And whenever visitors would come to the property that didn't know about the children, and obviously the police have now arrived, all of the children were put in the hole. So when the police searched Uptop, there was no children to be found. And all of the children, when they were in the hole, they kept silent. Because you've got to realize that these children have been raised in this cult. They know nothing other than this cult. And they had always been taught that outsiders, especially people like the police, they were told that the police wanted to rape and kill them. So that is why the children stayed quiet, because they were terrified of the police. So the police left and the children were not saved. However, this is very significant because from this point going forward, things would keep going wrong. Because like I said, this brought a lot of attention to Anne. Media started picking up on the story of Anne and the mysterious cult. Camera crews were turning up at the meetings of the cult, trying to ambush Anne and trying to ask her questions about the cult. The media had also found out about the multiple children in the cult, and they asked Anne, "Do you abuse your children?"
Why did you start to take in the children?
Over 21 years, 28 young people went through our hands.
Why did you do that?
I love children.
But not just that, some of the cult members had even started to leave, which I know was something that Anne never allowed to happen.
We just don't want to speak to you. There's nothing to talk about. Does it concern you, the allegations former sect members have been making? No, it doesn't concern me one bit. Are you a follower of Mrs. Hamilton Burns?
I'm a friend of Mrs. Hamilton Burns.
Do you believe she's a teacher?
I believe she's just a great friend of mine, all right?
However, it was starting to get out of control. Multiple people wanted to leave, and ultimately Anne couldn't stop them. And then the cult members that were leaving started to talk to the media, and everything just kept getting worse and worse. And then on top of all of that, the children started to rebel, because at this point they were older now. Most of them were teenagers. Sarah and Leanne, the two oldest, were 16 and 17. The children were starving. They were completely fed up. So the children, especially Sarah and Leanne, would break out of the compound at night. They would walk to nearby houses and break into those houses to steal food. And they would steal food and bring the food back to the other children at the compound. And this went on for so long that the community that was not a part of the cult finally started to clock on that there was children at that compound. And the police were sent there again, but again the children were put in the hole. And at this point, it was now 1987. The cult had been going on for approximately 30 years. But after all of these years, Anne was nearly 66 years old, and she was tired. She was fed up. She actually didn't want to be the cult leader anymore, because Anne had gotten what she wanted. She wanted a family. She wanted all of these children. I don't think Anne ever set out to become a cult leader. I think she just wanted power and control and a family. But at this point in 1987, she just couldn't be asked anymore. And she basically fled to her fancy mansion in upstate New York, and she barely ever returned to the compound, to the cult in Australia. But the aunties were still there at the compound. They were still controlling, abusing their children on Anne's orders, and Anne was just gallivanting around all these different countries. Leanne and Sarah were getting more and more out of control. They were breaking out of the compound more and more, and because they kept breaking out of the compound, they actually started to meet some of the other children in the community, and they made friends with two girls called Kathy and Helen. And Kathy and Helen showed Sarah and Leanne what life was like outside of the cult, how children should be raised. And Kathy and Helen's parents almost took Sarah and Leanne under their wing, and they would kind of look after them, and they would take them on their family trips. They would go shopping to the mall. They would eat McDonald's. Sarah and Leanne even started to attend dance classes. And then Leanne and Sarah would return back to the compound and talk to the other children about what the world was like. And as you can imagine, Anne, even though she can't be bothered, she is furious about this. And on the phone, she's in New York. She tells the aunties to severely punish Sarah and Leanne for doing this. But the two of them, especially Sarah, at this point, they couldn't care. They knew what the outside world was like at this point, and they knew that they had to get out. So in one final act of rebellion, Sarah broke probably the number one rule of Up Top and the cult. She brought an outsider to the compound. She brought one of her friends home with her, which was like the number one rule. You cannot break that rule. Outsiders were not allowed in the cult. They were not allowed in the compound. And when Anne heard that Sarah had brought an outsider to the compound, Anne had had enough, and she kicked Sarah out. Yep, she kicked Sarah out of the cult. This was probably music to Sarah's ears. Sarah was told that she was no longer a member of the family. And Anne, over the phone, said to Sarah, quote, "You are no longer our daughter. Go out there and die in the gutter." So Sarah was kicked out. But did things end there? Of course not, because Leanne also left. She packed up her bag and followed Sarah out of the compound. And afterwards, Sarah and Leanne went to the police together, which I've got to say was so brave of both of them, because their whole life they have been told that the police are evil, that the police will rape and kill them. And once they told the police everything, Anne's world came crashing down. Because on the 14th of August 1987, something very significant happened, because the police took Sarah and Leanne's reports seriously and they jumped straight into action. And at 7 a.m. that morning, the police stormed Up Top compound and the other children were finally saved. First of all, the children were absolutely terrified, the other children at Up Top, because they also believed that the police were evil, that they were there to rape and kill them. So the children were actually resisting the police and trying to kick and scream at them, and they were trying to not be saved. But they were finally rescued, and the aunties that were at the compound were also arrested. Anne's other properties in Australia were also raided, and they found a ton of documentation on the cult. They also found huge stashes of LSD, and they had documents of all of the members of the cult. And you've got to realize that these members, they were pretty important, powerful, wealthy people, and pretty much everything came crashing down and all of the cult members just started to flee. The psychiatric hospital was shut down. Finally, Dr. Whitaker, who was the one that ran the LSD experimental program, well, his license was taken off him.
You and Dr. Whitaker are both on record as having been members of the group called The Family. How did that relate to your practice as a psychiatrist? Were you always able to keep that barrier between the two?
At times you had patients who went into yoga classes and then meditation classes and became members of that group. The fact that your practice had a spiritual bias, it wasn't used as a method of recruiting or anything like that. In fact,
Dr. Johnson, the university professor that basically co-founded the cult, well, his reputation was in ruins.
It's been suggested that drugs are used within your group.
This, of course, I deny absolutely.
There's also been some concern about children. Baby farm was an expression.
Well, that's just ridiculous. That kind of nasty allegation, if somebody will come out with it, we'll take action against them.
And Anne and Bill. Anne and Bill, where are they? Well, they're hiding out in New York. They had gotten word that the cult had basically come crashing down and they were laying low. So at the moment, they're in New York and the Australian authorities at this moment cannot touch them. So right now, they're completely untouchable. For now. We do come back round to them though shortly. But first of all, we need to talk about the children because they were in an absolute terrible state. They were malnourished. They were so underweight, but they were just completely terrified and also brainwashed. And remember Cassandra, the poor girl that was so malnourished that she was unable to walk and she was crawling around on her stomach? Well, she was 12 years old when she was rescued and she was in an absolute awful condition. She only weighed 20 kilograms, which is barely over 3 stone. She was also 12 centimeters shorter than average for her age. And it's said that she looked like a 4 or 5 year old, not a 12-year-old. And it turns out that she actually had a diagnosable medical condition, which is called, and this is a tongue twister for me, it is called psychosocial short stature, which is a condition where a child literally stops producing growth hormones because they are living in a stressful environment. Anne put this girl through so much that she literally stopped growing. And after she was rescued and rehabilitated, she started to grow again. And within a year, Cassandra had grown by 11 centimeters, which is like off the charts growth. And as for the other children, they had to be rehabilitated themselves as well. And the Australian Social Services did did an incredible job with all of the children because there were so many of them. And normally when there are so many children, social services will have to split them up. But social services kept all of the children together. They rehabilitated them together. They cared for them. They nurtured them. And with the love and care from the social services, the children were able to turn their lives around. And it's just so happy to think that the children, they were finally being children. They were playing together. They were going to the beach. They were going on outings. They finally started to celebrate birthdays, because that's something that I didn't get a chance to touch on, but they didn't celebrate birthdays. They didn't even know when their actual birthday was because Anne would forge their birth certificates. And when they were first rescued, whenever an adult would go near them, they would instantly flinch because previously an adult coming near them would mean punishment. But finally they learned how to live a normal life, because it's so sad when you realize how little these children knew. They didn't even know how to cross a road, for example. They didn't even know the basics. They were scared of the refrigerator. They would just stare at it because they were never allowed to get food themselves at the compound. They also finally learned that Anne wasn't their biological mother, because their whole life they had thought that Anne and Bill were their biological parents. Well, now they finally learned that that was all a lie. And even though it took far too long, it does make me happy that they were finally shown the love and the attention that they need and deserve. So now we need to revisit Anne and Bill, who are hiding out in New York, because personally, I feel like Anne and Bill need to be extradited back to Australia, locked up, and the key thrown away. But unfortunately, it's not always that simple. Because first of all, Bill and Anne were on the run. They were moving from country to country and authorities didn't actually know where they were. Also, the police struggled to build a case against Bill and Anne, which sounds crazy to me because I'm like, what do you mean you are struggling to build a case? You have all of these children here. They can give evidence of what happened to them. There are all these documents of Anne and all of the things that she did. How are you struggling to build a case? The police interviewed the children. They interviewed Sarah and Leanne, who gave so many details of what happened to them.
It's difficult with dates because our life was sort of, we were brought up in such a stultifying sort of daily routine. Every day was the same, every weekend was the same.
I had been taught that police and other outsiders would hurt us, and that men would want to rape us.
And I was put under arrest for a very long period of time. And it was a couple of weeks at least.
I resent not being allowed to go to a normal school and not being allowed to form normal relationships.
Do you want to stop for a while, or do you want to keep trying to go till it's finished?
I'll keep going.
They interviewed the aunties, but of course the aunties denied everything.
Jean Whittaker from the Creeks. Right, and your occupation?
State registered nurse.
Is that your signature?
No comment.
Sorry?
No comment.
Do you recognise that document? It's a photostat document of an original.
No comment.
Other members of the cult were also tracked down and interviewed, but of course, like the aunties, they also denied everything.
Harry Moore's my name, Dr. McKay. I'm wondering if you've got any comment to make now about what happened to the children. Why won't you have... Is that all you've got to say, Dr. McKay? After what you've put those kids through? There's no need for that, Dr. McKay.
And the police actually struggled to find evidence that the children had even been abused. I'm sorry, what? Did we not just talk about Cassandra and the condition that she was diagnosed with? She was quite clearly starved. She was malnourished. Is that not enough evidence of abuse for you? But yeah, the police couldn't find any evidence that the children were abused. They couldn't find any evidence of the children being starved, which again, Cassandra, really? It was too late to find evidence of the children being drugged with LSD because it was obviously not in their system anymore. And also on a lot of the charges, the statute of limitations had passed, which is incredibly infuriating. I could literally do a whole video about how much I hate the statute of limitations. Now listen, I understand statute of limitations. I understand that it is important to have, but I feel like there are some crimes that there shouldn't be a statute of limitations, and those crimes include include children. Any crimes against children, there should not be a statute of limitations. It shouldn't matter how much time has passed, you should be able to bring charges on someone. But the investigation kept going. They really did try and build a case. And I will say that the police working on this case, they did try their best, but their hands were tied in a lot of the situation. And they tried to build a case for 5 years. That is how long this investigation went on for. And for those 5 years, Anne and Bill are just living it up in all of their different properties around the world. But then in 1993, Anne slipped up. She made a phone call to Sarah, accidentally revealing her location. She was currently in her mansion in upstate New York, and Sarah told the police told the FBI swooped in and arrested her. And Bill and Anne are finally extradited back to Australia. So once they are in Australia, Anne is held in a prison cell. She has all of her fancy clothes taken away from her, all of her fancy wigs. She no longer has access to her money. She no longer has access to any of her followers. She really has fallen from grace.
Just before 9 o'clock this morning, Victorian police had Anne and William Hamilton Byrne back on Australian soil.
But the case goes to trial. And this is where this case gets infuriating. Even though Anne has committed so many offences, I have lost count. Anne has committed some of the most horrific crimes I have ever heard about. Because let's break it down. She ran a cult for 30 years. She abused the medical system. She got people committed to a psychiatric hospital when they didn't need to be. She stole babies from innocent, young, vulnerable mothers. She raised 28 stolen children and she abused them physically, psychologically, and emotionally for 20 years.
Hamilton Byrne, Mary Moore from Channel 9. You got any comment now about why you kept those children locked away for so long? Why not?
They weren't locked away.
They weren't locked away. You don't call keeping them like you for those years. You got up and you stole the children? You stole them from sect members? Got doctors to organise the adoption?
Excuse me.
We have legal action. It's their rights to say nothing. You have no rights to be asking these things.
Do you think you have spiritual powers?
I don't think I have spiritual powers.
And that is just a very quick breakdown of what she did. She also did a lot of other things. You got to remember how many people she drugged as well. But the prosecution were only able to make one charge stick against her, which was conspiracy to defraud. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. She is only being charged with conspiracy to defraud. And this is basically because she forged the birth certificates of the children, and then the prosecution could only prove that she had forged 3 of the birth certificates. So that is what she was being charged with, forging 3 birth certificates. When I found out that, I was literally screaming. I was so angry. I was like, what the actual hell? You're telling me that she is only being charged with fraud? But that is not the worst of it. Oh no. Bill was also charged with conspiracy to defraud. So Anne and Bill pleaded guilty to this charge. And their punishment, brace yourselves, brace yourselves. The punishment for Anne Hamilton Byrne was a $5,000 fine. What? $5,000. $5,000 for everything that she has done. Her punishment is a fine. And she is a multimillionaire. What is $5,000 to her? And then she just walked out of that courtroom a free woman. A few other charges were also brought against the aunties. Not for child abuse though. They were charged with committing social benefit fraud. Really? And the aunties received a very short prison sentence. And then they were also released to be free. And you're probably thinking, how the hell did this happen? How did Anne Hamilton Byrne walk free after everything that she has done? Well, apparently there were members of the cult working for Anne that were inside the criminal justice system. And this is how she was able to get away with it. Anne really did have power and influence everywhere. I cannot believe that that is how this case has ended.
The founder of the family religious sect and her husband have been spared jail terms for faking documents which claim 3 children were their own. $5,000 fines were imposed on the couple, and outside the court...
The Hamilton Byrnes escaped a maximum 5-year jail term and $60,000 fine. They had nothing to say about it.
Well, the inadequacies of the legal system, I think that goes without saying. What I would say is I'm very glad it's all over and we can get on with living our lives.
Didn't I tell you that this case would make your blood boil? After everything that these children went through, the fact that they were stolen from their mothers, they never received justice for what happened to them. And then what happened to the cult after the trial? Well, it continued. Even though the kids were rescued, and as far as I'm aware, there were no more children stolen, but the cult just continued and went back to being the leader of her cult. Sarah did actually go on to write a book called Unseen, Unheard, Unknown, where she exposed everything that happened. Also, some of the other children did speak out against Anne, but Anne has always denied everything. Anne even gave an interview and Sarah was also there. And again, I don't know how Sarah was brave enough to go back into a room with Anne.
We didn't have everything that we needed. We had most things. I bought the bigger house because of the likes of little Sarah.
People don't try and take their life because their house is too small.
You're not smart enough.
For what?
In your heart. What's in your heart is not the same.
I don't know what you mean by that.
No, of course you don't.
And the interview is actually on YouTube, so you're going to have to go and watch it after this video, but I will insert some clips. And oh my God, Anne and her little buddy next to her, oh my God, him I want to punch.
All the children made all of this up, did they?
Could be. And they were paid for it. They were paid. You were paid a lot of money.
We weren't paid any money, Michael.
You were certainly paid.
I'm asking. So it didn't happen in your eyes either?
I had a son there.
And how did he go?
Fine.
Was he abused?
No.
And Anne and her little buddy behind her are denying everything and blaming everything on Sarah. And it's so infuriating that even still after all of these years, they are not owning up to anything and they are denying everything.
Did you carry Sarah? Were you her biological mother?
Well, I naturally believe I was. Of course I was.
She has a biological mother.
Do you have DNA to prove it?
The police do, yeah.
No, the police. Do you? Always put it on other people, but do you?
Michael, you're living in a fantasy.
No, I'm not. You're living in a fantasy of pain and deprivation.
Sarah even received death threats from the current cult members.
You're living a lie.
I am not living a lie, Michael.
As far as I'm concerned, you're living a lie. And
because your entire life is a network of lies.
You're suffering for it.
I'm suffering.
We all live lies. We all are living a lie.
What I've suffered in this life is because of what happened up there.
I had a lot of pain.
As long as you blame others, you're nowhere. You're nowhere.
And then 8 years after the court case, Bill passed away. And then in 2004, so 11 years after the court case, Anne was diagnosed with dementia and she was put in a care home. But even still, even though she was in a care home, she still lived a life of luxury because remember, she is a multi-millionaire. And then in June of 2019, so not that long ago, Anne Hamilton Byrne passed away at the age of 98. She had a long, happy life. She was very happy, but she left a huge trail of destruction in her wake. She never showed any remorse. She never apologized. She never acknowledged anything that she did.
Why don't you apologize then? It's so easy.
Because I don't believe in you.
Will you apologize to her?
Of course I will. At the right time. If I have to, of course I will.
And in her will, she was still a multi-millionaire. She left all of her millions to the other remaining cult members. And as for Anne's biological child, because remember she did have a biological daughter called Judith, I couldn't really find out what happened to her. All I know is that she was estranged from her mother and she changed her name, which was probably for the best. And unbelievably, to this very day, the cult, the family, is still going on. I mean, it hasn't recruited any new members. It's still just the existing members. But yeah, the family is still currently operational. So if you live in Melbourne, look out. Be on the lookout for the family. And the cult is just living off of Anne's millions. And there is one more crazy thing about the cult. So you know Julian Assange, is that how you pronounce his name? Of WikiLeaks. Well, it's strongly rumoured that he was one of the children from the family. Now, Julian denies all of this, but Julian has said that his mum was involved with the family at some point. So who knows? Maybe Julian Assange was one of the children in the family. He definitely looks the part. Oh, and that was the case, the crazy case of Anne Hamilton Byrne and the cult The Family. And Anne really was the worst. Like I said in the intro, she has to be one of the most, if not the most evil women that has ever come out of Australia. And I want to end this video talking about the children and what happened to them as they grew up into adults. Understandably, most of them wanted just normality. They were sick of being different. They were sick of being the children from the family. So a lot of the children have changed their names and they have never revealed their identities because they don't want to be associated with this case. But it is amazing to hear that most of the children are actually still in touch with one another. They pop in and visit each other, they get together for birthdays, and they treat each other like family. They have a deep bond that no one else could understand what they went through. And on the 14th of August every single year, they celebrate this day as their Freedom Day. And then for the children that have revealed their identities, amazingly and thankfully, most of them have gone on to live very fulfilled lives. Ben Shenton, who was 15 years old when he was rescued, he went on to marry and have 2 children. He is a devoted member of his local church, and he now works as a project manager at IBM. Leanne, who was one of the children that ran away from the home, she also went on to marry and have 2 children, as well as going on to study at university, and she now works in the construction industry. Anna Ree, who was Bill's biological granddaughter, she went on to study film at university. She then taught English in Japan, and she now lives in Australia with her partner and her 2 children. Rebecca, who was Anne's biological grandchild, managed to sue Anne for what she had done and won $250,000. She was also able to turn her life around and also has children of her own. And then finally Sarah, who was the first child that was stolen. And Sarah was crucial in bringing this cult down. She obviously went on to write her book, which is why we know so much about the cult and what happened. And she has worked so hard to raise awareness of what she went through, what the other children went through. Sarah, all she wants was to get the truth out there. Sarah also went on to marry and study medicine at university, then became a qualified doctor and ran her own medical practice, as well as spending a large amount of her time volunteering in India and Thailand, where she has helped displaced refugees, which is honestly incredible. She has literally spent her whole life trying to help people. And what is even more amazing is that Sarah managed to reconnect with her birth mother. And it's just really heartwarming to hear that the children, they managed to turn their lives around. However, every single child that grew up in that cult has been left with scars and trauma that they have to deal with every single day. And we do know that some of the children that were rescued from the cult have taken their own lives because the trauma was just too much, which just absolutely breaks my heart. And finally, Sarah, even though she managed to turn her life around, she still suffered greatly. She had gone through so much. She became addicted to prescription medication, and in 2004 she tried to take her own life. However, the attempt failed, and during the attempt she accidentally injected air into her leg, and this led to complications and she had to have her leg amputated. She then had to live with a prosthetic leg as well as using a wheelchair. And then very sadly, 12 years later in 2016, Sarah suffered from heart failure, and it is thought that the heart failure could have come from complications from when she tried to take her own life. And Sarah very sadly passed away at the age of 46. So even though Anne never took any lives herself with her own hands, she still has blood on her hands. And it's just really heartbreaking to end the video on such a sad note. It just feels like this case, there was no justice served. And I just really hope that all of the children that escaped the family, who are obviously now adults, I just wish them all the best, and I really hope that they're doing okay. And that is the end of this case, which was a heavy one. It really was. I think we all need a break after this case. Wow. And I feel like we all need to go hug our pets after this if you have them, or your children, or your partner. Just hug someone. And speaking of pets, I have been seeing in the comments that a few of you want to see Daisy again. So hopefully... Thank you. Thank you. You don't like the taste of the makeup, do you? No. Hopefully Daisy can put a little smile on your face. Oh, Daisy. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you too. I love you. Oh, Daisy. Hi everyone, welcome back. I missed you all last week. I hope you had a good 2 weeks. So today we're coming back with a bang because we have a cult. Now I haven't actually done that many cults on this channel. I've only done one other cult, which was the Anthill Kids cult, which was, how do you even describe that cult? The Anthill Kids cult is definitely a very heavy one, but unfortunately today's isn't that much better. And the cult that we're going to be covering today is from the UK, and being from the UK myself, I was really shocked at this because you don't hear about British cults that often. I mean, the UK has its fair share of some of the most sadistic people on the planet, but you don't really hear that much about British cults. So when I heard about this cult, I was shocked.
3 women who claim they've been held as slaves in a home in London for at least 30 years.
A 69-year-old from Malaysia, a 57-year-old from Ireland, and a 30-year-old British woman. We have seen some cases where people have been held for up to 10 years, but we have never seen anything of this magnitude before. Thank you.
And I literally only found out about this cult a couple of weeks ago, and I was blown away, and I was like, right, that's it. I've got to do this cult straight away. Now, this cult it does have an official name, but it does have a couple of names. This is the Workers' Institute cult, and they operated for over 30 years in the middle of London. Just smack bang in the middle of London, in a regular house, on a busy street in London, there was a cult for over 30 years. This cult was literally hiding in plain sight, which is very unusual, isn't it? Because when you think of cults, you think of a community of people running off into the mountains, into the wilderness, jungle, something like that. But this cult was just living in plain sight. And this cult was led by a man called Aravindan Balakrishnan. And he is just a typical cult leader. He's very egotistical, he's very narcissistic, he has a god complex, and there are some absolutely horrific things that we're going to talk about in this video, so I do have to give a warning. We're going to be talking about extreme abuse, extreme manipulation, extreme brainwashing, sexual abuse. Some of this as well happens to a baby, literally a child, because that is one of the most shocking things about this case, is that a baby was born into this cult and was held captive for 30 years. 30 years. How is this possible in the middle of London? And this baby was Katie Morgan Davis, and it's really just crazy. We are going to be focusing a lot on her story throughout this case, but yeah, I just can't even imagine she was held for 30 years. 30 years. Let that sink in. So we have a lot to get through, and I mean that, and it is kind of a complicated story as well. I did have a lot of difficulties when I was doing my research because it is so complicated and there's just so many characters and there's so many things that happened in this cult. I mean, this cult went on for like nearly 40 years, so there is a lot of information in this video. I am going to try and make it as simple as possible, but grab a 3-course meal. We are going to be here for a while. And let's just dive straight in. Aravindan Balakrishnan was born on the 16th of July, 1940, making him our official first cancer. And Aravindan does go by the names Bala and also AB, but just for the sake of this video and to make it less confusing, I'm just going to be calling him Bala. And Bala was born in Kerala, India. And because of his dad's work, he did move to Singapore when he was 10 years old. Now, Bala was extremely intelligent, which is something that he would definitely use to his advantage later on. And he was also a pretty short child, and even as an adult, he only ever grew to the height of 5'3". Now, Bala would get repeatedly told by his mother that he possessed supernatural powers and that he was also possessed by the occult. Now, I read that she thought that he was possessed because he used to swear quite a lot and he used to curse other people when he was angry, which I don't exactly think that that means you are possessed by the occult, but that is what his mom would think. It was enough to make Bala truly believe that he was possessed and had supernatural powers. And this is definitely something that he would tell everyone everyone later on in life. I feel like already, even as a child, you can see the potential cult leader in him. And apart from that, not much is actually known about Bala's childhood, which is really annoying because I do like to look into the childhood of the people that we cover on this channel because I do think it plays a part, and Bala is definitely someone that I would have liked to have known more about his childhood. Now we are jumping to Bala when he's aged 23 and he arrives in the UK for the first time, and obviously this is where the rest of the case takes place. And I do just think it's really shocking that this cult happened in the middle of London. Like, how did no one know about this? It was literally happening under people's noses. And once Bala arrives in the UK, he really does start to become the cult leader that he clearly has always wanted to be. So Bala had arrived to the UK on a scholarship to study at one of the London universities. He threw himself into the school politics of his university. Bala believed that the UK was turning into what he said, quote, a fascist state. And Bala's solution to this was radical communism. And in particular, he closely followed the teachings of China's chairman Mao. And to be honest, what Bala believed in was actually really confusing, and to be honest, I don't think Bala himself even knew exactly what he believed in, but basically, just to make it really simple, Bala was basically anti-establishment, anti-authority. He hated being told what to do. He thought that the UK government was overbearing, too controlling, and a revolution was needed to put a stop to this. So throughout the 60s in the UK, Bala was handing out leaflets. He was kind of preaching on the streets to people to believe in the things that he believed in. And he was involved in a lot of protests, which involved a lot of clashes with the police. He also joined quite a few political organizations, but his views were so extreme that those organizations, which were already extreme in themselves, kicked Bala out. And I feel like you see this a lot with cult leaders where they originally join organizations or religions or anything like that. They try and overthrow that organization, fail, and then get kicked out, because that's basically what happened with Bala. So because Bala was kicked out of these organizations, Bala basically took on the mentality of, you know what, screw you, I'm going to start my own organization. And this is where the cult is born. He set up his own organization called the Workers' Institute. And I really am fascinated by cults. I've looked into quite a lot of cults in depth, and I feel like this is just the beginning of every cult. I feel like there is just a handbook that they all follow. So Bala had about 25 loyal followers that joined him in his new organization, and him and his little group of followers would go onto the street, hand out leaflets, try and talk to as many people as possible, try and recruit as many people as possible into their organization, or should I say cults. Then to make things even more culty, is that even a word? Culty, whatever, I'm going with it. To make things even more culty, they set up a headquarters in just an old building in the middle of Brixton, London, and all of Bala's followers lived in this headquarters. So yeah, it's just a cult, it's just a commune. And all of these followers, which was like 25 people, would sleep in this headquarters on the floor. Now Bala at this time wasn't the most strict. He definitely gets worse, but Bala at this time only had one rule, and that is that all men must sleep in one room, all women in the other room, and nobody was allowed to have sex with one another apart from Bala. Bala was allowed to have sex with anyone he wanted. It's like, could you get any more stereotypical cult leader? It's like, literally, why is that always a thing? Why is it that the cult leader always wants to have sex with absolutely everyone but bans sex for anyone else? Now, this group, I should really just call them a cult, shouldn't I, were a nightmare for the neighbours, because obviously they're just in this random house in London, so they do have neighbours. And this group were very hostile, rude, argumentative to the neighbours. They were causing so much trouble. They were basically just really rude and dismissive to anybody that didn't hold the same beliefs as them. So there was this one incident where clearly a neighbour was having a party, I don't know, a little get together, and they were creating a little bit too much noise. And Bala did not like this. So Bala got a meat cleaver. We're going there. He got a meat cleaver, stormed into his neighbour's house. A man was just standing on the stairs, kind of leaning on the banister. And Bala got the meat cleaver and swung it to hit the man's arm that was on the banister. Thankfully, that man moved his arm in time and the meat cleaver was just stuck in the banister. But it's just like, what the hell? Bella has literally gone to hack off someone's arm because they're making too much noise. It's like, imagine just being in your house, there's a little like barbecue party or something, and a neighbor, a strange, crazed, possessed man comes into your home with a meat cleaver to hack off your arm. I'm sorry, but that is terrifying. And Bala was reported to the police and he was sent to prison, but he was only sent to prison for 2 months. 2 months. I'm sorry, but the UK needs to get its act together with these prison sentences. And after Bala was released, after these 2 months, he was even more riled up. He hated the British state even more. He was spreading even more lies, more propaganda. He was saying that the British state were framing him. There was another time that he did also get arrested. Again, though, his prison sentence was only a few months. It's like, seriously? And when he was in the court, when he was being sentenced, he wasn't paying attention to anything that was going on. Instead, he was just chanting the words, quote, "Death to the British fascist state, victory to world revolution." And then after Bala got out of prison that second time, he decided that he wasn't going to risk it anymore. He couldn't be out in public, out in the open, doing what he was doing. He needed to go underground. And this is where it really does get very cult-like now. Like, this is full-blown, we are in the cult now. So we're moving into the 80s now, and the group are moving into a house that was given to them by the local council. Bala told everyone that they needed to drop off the radar in order to protect themselves from the British state. Bala told all of his followers that they would need to cut off all ties with family, friends. They would need to leave the house as little as possible. And after hearing this, a lot of his followers were just like, yeah, nah, this is not for me. I'm out. But Bala was left with a few loyal followers, which were all women, I should add. And there were 8 women who were all prepared to move in with Bala into this house in Brixton and basically follow him and do whatever he wanted. Now is probably a good time to kind of list off the followers that were in the group. So we obviously have 8 women. One of the women was a woman named Chanda, and she was Bala's wife. I know, Bala has a wife who is now a dedicated, loyal follower. Then there was Chanda's sister, who was also in the cult. I don't actually think she was there by choice. I think she was made to be there. And then there were 6 other followers who were Sean, Josie, Aisha, Leanne, Cindy, and O. And Sean is probably the most significant out of those followers. Now, Sean first met Bala when she was at university. She was in her early 20s. She was an extremely gifted person, but she had kind of become a little bit lost, a little bit disillusioned with life. And she was just really craving someone to guide her through life, take her under their wing. And this is when she met Bala at university, and she got taken up with him. She started to believe his message, his beliefs. She completely cut off ties with all of her friends, all of her family, and became probably Bala's most devoted follower. Now, as well as Sean, the 6 other women had a very similar profile. They all met Bala when they were in their early 20s, when they were at university. All of them were just a little bit lost, didn't really know where their life was going, craving just someone to give them a little bit of direction, and they met Bala. Bala could see that they were a little bit lost, took advantage of them, and then they became a follower in his cult. But what is absolutely crazy is that one of the women in the cult actually gave up an engagement to be in the cult, which I think is just absolutely crazy. Like, how does Bala have that much influence? So these women just literally packed up their lives, said goodbye to their old lives, and moved into this house in Brixton. Bala told the women all the time that everyone outside of the house was an enemy and a member of the evil British state. And basically the group, which is now known as the Collective, needed to hide themselves from the British state so they could start a revolution. Pretty much with all cults, what you find is in the beginning, the people in the cult are really devoted, really believe in the message and everything that the leader is saying. And this is exactly the case with the women in the cult. They were full of hope, full of optimism. They were literally hanging on every word that Bala said. Bala created this us against the world mentality. He gave his followers followers purpose. He gave them an identity. As with all cults though, this us against the world message soon turns into me against you. You must do as I say. I am the greatest. Bala started to tell the collective more extreme stories about how powerful he was, how he was the greatest, the almighty. And Bala was just slowly brainwashing his collective. He was slowly manipulating them into believing that he had these supernatural powers, that he was this almighty being. He did it in a way that was so slow that the women in the cult probably didn't even realize that it was happening. Bala then started to tell his collective that he was God. Yeah, let's not beat around the bush here. He was telling his followers that he was God, literally God. And like I've said, like, could he be any more stereotypical cult leader? Bala also told the collective that he was the ruler of the world. And I'm being deadly serious here. He said that he was the ruler of the world. Conveniently for Bala, he was the secret ruler of the world. He said that because the British state was out to get him, he had to rule the world in secret. So this explained why no one else in the world knew that he was the ruler of the world. That's just very convenient, isn't it? I literally feel like I'm just listing off the most ridiculous things in the world, like ever. But here's another one for you. Bala also told his followers that he had mind control. Yeah, he possessed the power to control your mind. He could literally create earthquakes, thunderstorms with just a click of his finger. He also said that every war ever in the history of the world, so every single war, he was responsible for. And I feel like this is a very good time to point out that Bala was also claiming to be immortal. He also claimed responsibility for the splitting of the atom and the moon landing. Basically, any significant advancement or event ever in the history of ever, forever and ever, Bala was responsible for. I told you he was egotistical, and I definitely think that Bala has to be the most egotistical person I think I've ever come across. But Bala didn't do this completely on his own. Clearly, even he thought that it was a little bit too far-fetched to believe that one person could be responsible for all of this. So Bala had a sidekick who he called Jackie. And you're probably thinking, like, who's Jackie? Like, who are they? Well, they're not even a real person. They are a made-up figment of Bala's imagination. It was just a made-up character for Bala to use to manipulate his followers. So Jackie is not even a person, it's actually an acronym. So Jackie stands for Jehovah, Allah, Christ, Krishna, Immortal, Iswaran. And Jackie was this all-powerful machine, this invisible computer that only Bala could control. Again, very convenient that Jackie is invisible and only Bala can control it. And Jackie could do pretty much anything, whether it was the mundane things of just turning on the kettle, turning on a light switch, to the more extreme things like literally causing a person to just drop dead, or even destroying a whole country with just a click of Bala's fingers. So basically, Jackie can do everything and anything. Whatever Bala wants, Jackie will do. And these were the kinds of things that Bala would tell his followers. And I think it's very easy for all of us right now to just sit here, hear things like that and almost laugh and not really take it too seriously because we are not brainwashed, for starters. But to us, this sounds completely ridiculous. It's almost like, well, how does anybody believe that such a thing can exist? But Bala's followers are completely brainwashed at this point. They hang on every single word that Bala says. So they believe him. So now we're getting to the part of the story where Katie is introduced. Remember, I spoke about her in the intro, the baby that was born into the cult and held captive for 30 years, which that in itself is just completely mind-blowing. So the series of events leading up to the birth of Katie is that Bala's wife, Chanda, was pretty seriously ill. And she was so severely ill that she had to be hospitalized. And she was in hospital for quite a long time. So now Bala is living in a house with 7 other women and his wife is in hospital. And I feel like we all know where this story is going right now. Because pretty much like every single other disgusting, creepy cult leader, Bala decided that he wanted to start having sexual relations with the other women in the cult. But the thing is, the sexual relations were not consensual, let's just say. So all 7 of the women were sexually abused by Bala. Bala started by forcing all of the women to perform oral sex on him, and if any of them refused to do this, Bala literally threatened to kill them by using their pressure point on their throat. So he is literally threatening to kill these women if they don't perform sexual acts on him. And it only escalated from there, because from the oral sex, he then forced the women to perform very humiliating, degrading acts on him, which I'm not going to go into detail because honestly, I don't need to. Just think of really humiliating sexual things that someone could force you into doing, and that is what Bala was forcing the women to do. And it wasn't long until he was raping all 7 women on a daily basis. This sexual abuse happened every single day. But it didn't stop there. Oh no, of course it didn't, because Bala actually created a rota so he could sexually assault the women on a fixed schedule, which, I'm sorry, just adds another layer of absolute sickness to this whole thing, because this rota would just be on the wall, so the women that lived in this house would know exactly what day and what time they were going to be sexually abused, which, I'm sorry, if that is not another level of sick, I don't know what is. The women were given 1 hour time slots to be sexually abused. And even after his wife returned home from the hospital, the sexual abuse did not stop. I actually don't know if his wife was aware of the sexual abuse, because all the time Bala would just find reasons for his wife to leave the house so then Bala could sexually assault all of the women in the house, which is very hypocritical, isn't it? Because not too long ago, he was preaching to all of his followers that they were not allowed to leave the house. But now all of a sudden his wife is allowed to leave. And this sexual assault went on for years. Years and years. One of the women later testified that she was sexually abused. I think she was raped every single week for 6 years. And I just find it really heartbreaking that all of these women really did believe that Bala could kill them with just a single thought. If Bala wanted to, he could set Jackie on them to kill them, which is why they almost willingly participated in the sexual abuse, which is honestly just so sick, and it's just so absolutely heartbreaking. And it was because of all of this sexual abuse that one of the women fell pregnant. And this woman was Sian, which I said was a very key character in this story. So this is when Katie was born. She was born into this crazy cult, and as you can imagine, she did not have a normal upbringing. Katie wasn't actually given the name Katie at first. That is just the name that she has chosen herself later on, which is why I'm using her chosen name. Instead, at birth, Katie was given the name Prem Malpinduzi, which translated to Love Revolution. And it was at this point that Bala introduced the rest of the group to something that he called Project Prem. Bala decided that Katie was going to be raised like no other child had been raised in the world. Instead, Katie would be raised in isolation, without love, without family, without outside influences, so she could remain pure and safe from the British state. Bala could not risk Katie, quote, becoming soft, which meant that she was to be shown no love, no affection, no close human contact, nothing. She was basically to be raised the complete opposite of how a child should be raised. This also meant that Katie was never allowed to know who her parents were. Even though Bala and Sian knew that they were obviously Katie's parents, and the rest of the collective knew that Bala and Sian were her parents, no one was allowed to tell Katie this. Instead, Katie would be raised collectively by the whole group. Everyone was just supposed to believe that Jackie had brought Katie into this world somehow. And this just doesn't even seem real, does it? Like, it doesn't. How can anybody do this to a child? And it's unbelievable what Katie had to go through, because on top of all of that, she was never allowed to be comforted. The group was strictly forbidden to show her any comfort, any love. So when Katie was a baby, and I need to stress this, newborn baby, when Katie would cry, like a baby does, the group were just instructed to ignore her. And if Katie, as a baby, couldn't be controlled, Bala would resort to violence. Bala would beat Katie until she was covered in bruises. And this situation is just really hard to imagine because obviously the group kept Katie fed, they kept her warm, they kept her clean, but they didn't show her any love. They didn't hug her, they didn't comfort her, they didn't play with her, they didn't talk to her. A child needs this. A child needs a safe pair of hands. A child needs comfort, they need love, they need fun, and Katie had none of this. Katie was also never allowed to visit the doctors, and this went for the whole group, not just Katie. The whole collective were never allowed to visit the doctors, the dentists, and literally, and I mean literally, everyone in the collective, their teeth were all falling out. It didn't matter how much pain people were in, people were not allowed to go to the hospital, to the doctors, because Bala despised Western medicine. And if anyone was seriously ill or sick, Bala's solution was to tell the person who was sick to meditate and concentrate on him. They needed to devote their mind to Bala, concentrate on him, only think of him. And if they did that, they would get better. And if they weren't getting better, that meant that they weren't doing it properly. And because of this, Katie, along with quite a few others in the group, were left with serious, undiagnosed, untreated health problems. On top of all of this, it was decided that Katie would never be allowed outside the house. She would never be allowed to go to school. She would never be allowed to play, to have fun, to ride a bike. She wasn't even allowed to run. Pretty much everything a normal child wants to do and is allowed to do, Katie wasn't. And it just is crazy that she wasn't allowed to run. Like, that is just something that I can't get my mind around, because children run. Children play, children have fun, but Katie wasn't even allowed to run. Instead, Katie would be completely isolated, completely alone, with Bala as the only influence in her life. And this, as you can imagine, had absolutely devastating effects on Katie. I mean, of course it did. The only thing that she knows in this whole world is Bala and this cult. And she has literally no idea about the rest of the world, about how she should be living. This is normal to her, which is truly heartbreaking that her life so far has been so miserable, but she thinks it's normal. But the brainwashing only gets worse from here, because when Katie was old enough to walk and talk, there was obviously a risk that she might escape. So Bala brainwashed her into being absolutely terrified of trying to escape to ensure that she never would. Bala told Katie that she was a high priority target of the British state who wanted to capture her and kill her. She was told that everyone outside of that house was a member of the British state and she could trust no one. There was one time, on the rare occasions where Katie was allowed in the back garden, that a child from the house next door saw Katie in the garden and started to wave at her like a normal child. Before Katie could even respond, before she could even wave back, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Katie didn't even really know what a wave was, which is just really sad. But before she could even react, two of the women from the cult rushed outside, grabbed Katie and dragged her back in the house. And when the women got Katie back inside, they said to her, "What were you doing? That child was a member of the British state. That child was sent by her evil grandparents to capture and kill you." And this is just one of many examples of the extreme brainwashing that Katie went through, because Katie is a child. I think she was about 3 years old when that incident happened. She is going to believe the adults around her because children believe adults. At this point in her life, Katie has no reason to not trust the people that she's living with. And it wasn't just Bala that was brainwashing Katie. From that example, you could see that the women were also participating. And Katie went to bed every single night having nightmares about everyone outside of the house trying to kill her. And after that little incident where Katie was in the garden, from that moment on, Katie was never left alone. She was with someone 24 hours every single day. And I do mean she was never alone. Whenever she used the bathroom, someone was there with her. In the shower, someone was there with her. Even when she went to bed at night, one of the women had to lay down next to her, and she was never allowed in the garden on her own again. Katie was told that if she ever went by the windows, if she ever looked out of the windows, one of her enemies would see her and capture her. And if she ever picked up the telephone, it was always the enemy on the other end, and they would send electronic waves through the phone to kill her. She was also told if she was to ever step foot outside of the front door, she would suffer what Bala called spontaneous human combustion. And this is another thing that's completely unbelievable. Like, none of us believe this, but Bala had managed to convince all of his followers that he could spontaneously make any of them explode at any moment with just the click of his fingers. And Katie believed this. Of course she did. She's a child. She has no perception of anything else in the world other than what Bala is telling her. And can you imagine how terrified Katie would have been? I mean, she's a child and her head is being filled with all of this death of killing. Katie is literally terrified to move, to put a foot out of place, because she is constantly worried that she is going to be killed. And there was just an absolutely horrific incident when Katie was just 4 years old, where as punishment, Bala threw Katie outside of the front door, and Katie went into an extreme panic. So all of this started because Katie was ill. She was throwing up. There was clearly something wrong with her. She clearly had a stomach bug or something like that, and she kept vomiting everywhere. And Bala was becoming infuriated at her because Bala was telling her, you need to meditate, you need to concentrate on me, and then you will be cured. But obviously, if she has some kind of stomach bug, some kind of infection, that is not going to work. So she wasn't getting better. So because she wasn't getting any better, Bala dragged her through the house, threw her on the floor by the front door, and literally started kicking and stomping on her head. And I feel like I just need to remind you all that she is only 4 years old at this point. And then Bala, still completely enraged, grabbed Katie and threw her out of the front door. And then he just shut the door. So Katie, 4 years old, is now outside of the front door for the very first time alone. She went into a complete panic attack. Her lungs were closing up, her head, she was getting dizzy, she didn't know what to do, she was screaming. She thought that she was going to get killed. She had always been told that if she stepped foot outside of the front door, she would be instantly killed. So at 4 years old, she is now in a full-blown panic attack because she thinks that someone from the British state, an enemy, is going to come and kill her. Even though she is incredibly weak from being sick, remember she's still ill, she has been beaten up, she finds strength to get up and start beating her fists on the front door, trying to get them to let her back in. And finally, after what must have felt like a lifetime to Katie, Bala let her back inside the house. He then said to Katie that he was willing to show her mercy and forgive her for what she has done. He made Katie believe that she was the one that needed to apologize to him, that she should be grateful for Bala letting her back in, for saving her life. Oh my God, another thing that just makes my blood boil. And this tactic that he did is just classic cult leader, isn't it? Classic cult leader 101. Life for Katie and the other women in the collective operated under a very strict schedule. And I mean literally everything that the women and Katie did was down to a very strict timetable that Bala gave them. First of all, they were all required to attend his daily lectures, where they were all made to stand during these lectures, maintain eye contact at all times. And if any of them broke eye contact, if any of them sat down, they would be beaten up by Bala. During these sessions, the collective were made to recite Bala's quote, truths, and they were forced to say the words Bala is God, God is Bala, Bala is knowledge, knowledge is Bala, and they were made to recite this over and over again every single day. And if that is not brainwashing, I don't know what is. There was also a chore rota that was scheduled, and all of the women had to take turns doing the chores around the house. Of course, Bala did nothing. All of the meals were scheduled. They had to eat at the same time every single day. The women obviously cooked the meals, and Bala always had to have the first serving of every single meal. Also, during meal times, there had to be silence. No one was allowed to talk. Even afternoon naps were scheduled every single day. And whenever Bala took a nap, Everyone else took a nap. Even his showers were scheduled, and it was imperative that one of the women from the collective would turn on the shower for him. I know, he can't even turn on his own shower. And this was seen as a great honor bestowed on you if you were the one chosen to turn on his shower. And then after his shower, someone would also have to turn it off. Again, this was seen as a great honor. And then this next bit is just completely unbelievable. So the 16th of July and the 16th of October were both very, very important days, and both days were celebrated. So we know that the 16th of July was Bala's birthday. Well, the 16th of October was the day of his conception, which he also saw as a day to celebrate. And then at the start of every single day, the collective would stand together and sing songs of praise for Bala to celebrate his existence. And obviously these songs were written by Bala, and I just can't believe it. Like, the ego on this man is absolutely unbelievable. Like I said, do you not think that this is the most egotistical person we have covered so far on this channel? And as you would expect in a cult like this, if anyone ever stepped out of line, violence would soon follow. Slaps and punches were a common occurrence, multiple times a day. Katie would often see the women in the cult with thick blood coming from their nose and their ears on a daily basis. And these beatings could come from anything from a minor transgression, such as breaking eye contact. The women were also beaten if they ever complimented each other. One time, one of the women said that they liked another woman's hair, and Bala beat them up. But what made everything just a million times worse is that these rules could change on a daily basis. So Katie and the women of the collective constantly lived in fear that they were breaking a rule that currently didn't exist. Everyone in that house constantly lived in fear. And when Bala would attack the people of the collective, if anyone ever intervened, ever stepped in, the beating would be 10 times harder. But what is the most tragic thing about all of this is that most of the time, the women of the collective would snitch on each other to Bala. Bala had managed to create the atmosphere where all of the women would turn on each other. They were all jealous of one another. They all hated one another because they all wanted to be Bala's favorite. So the women would think that if they snitched on other women and Katie, they would become the favorite. So not only do all of the women live in fear of Bala, but they also live in fear of each other. Except for Katie. Katie never turned anyone in for any rule breaking, but the women would always turn Katie in. Katie was not immune to any of this, even though she was a child. And Katie was forced to live under stricter rules than anyone else. She was forced to wear genderless clothing. She was forced to have her hair short. She had been completely stripped of any identity. She wasn't allowed to daydream, fantasize. She wasn't even allowed to giggle. How do you stop a child from giggling? It's like, oh my God, it's hard to imagine. And like I said earlier, she wasn't allowed to run around. She wasn't allowed to do anything normal for a child. And if any of these rules were broken, so if Katie giggled one time, she would be beaten up by Bala. And sometimes he would even use objects to beat her up, like a ruler, wooden spoons, slippers, shoes. But most of the time, it was with his own hands, and he would beat her until his own hands were bruised. And then he would turn around to Katie and say, "Look what you've done to my hands." Bala would tell Katie that it upset him deeply to beat her up, but the bruises on her skin were a sign of his love. And sadly, the woman that turned Katie in the most to Bala was Sian, Katie's own mother. Sian was the one that betrayed Katie at every turn possible. She would just stand there and watch Bala beat up her own daughter after she had turned her in. There was even a time where Sian forced Katie to eat her own vomit as a form of punishment. And understandably so, Katie had a huge hatred towards Sian. Like, out of all of the women in the collective, Katie hated Sian the most because she was the most evil. Katie had no idea whatsoever that Sian was actually her birth mother. And Katie had to suffer like this every single day from the moment she was born all the way through to her teenage years. Not only did she face violence on a daily basis, brainwashing, manipulation, she has also said that her life was mind-numbingly boring. She literally had nothing to do with her day. Every single day, there was nothing to do, ever. Even talking to the other people in the household was frowned upon. Like, it's just so hard to even imagine. I know I've said that so many times already in this case. I know I'm a broken record, but it really is just hard to imagine what her life would have been like. Because there was literally no one in the house for Katie to talk to, she found herself talking to objects just around the house. Like, she would talk to the bathroom tap just for company. The group did move around a bit. They did live in quite a few houses, and most of the time they just moved around to avoid detection. But apart from that, Katie has said that every single day consisted of the same 10-step schedule. Every day was exactly the same, and I have the 10-step routine here. Number 1, lectures. Number 2, singing. Number 3, writing. 4, food. Number 5, afternoon nap. Number 6, bath time. Number 7, study. Number 8, discussions with Sean to debate if I've been a, quote, good soldier that day. Number 9, food. Number 10, more lectures. Even Katie's toilet breaks were restricted to 1 to 2 minutes. And they were all living through this, all of the women, even though the women are obviously not completely innocent themselves, they are completely brainwashed. They are all victims of Bala. And I'm sure you're probably asking, because I asked multiple times during my research, why did no one leave? Why did no one try to leave? Especially the adults who should know that something like Jackie doesn't exist. Because obviously Katie, she's a child. She's grown up in this environment. She knows nothing but this environment. But the adults, like, they should know better. And there were times where a couple of them did try and leave, but it's not always that simple. One day, one of the women in the collective, a woman named Leanne, just stood up and said, I'm leaving. And as you can imagine, this did not go down well with Bala at all. He actually ordered the other women in the collective to hold Leanne down whilst he beat her up. But after this, Leanne was not deterred. She still wanted to escape, but this time she decided that she needed to do it in secret. So one day, she actually did manage to escape the house, and she made it from London to Southampton. But as soon as she got to Southampton, she was lost. She didn't know what to do. She had spent so many years in the cult, she didn't know how to operate in the real world. So she phoned Bala and apologized to him and begged him to take her back, which he did. She then stayed in the house for another year, but thankfully in 1989, Leanne actually did escape from the house, and she never returned. And then 3 years later, in 1992, another member of the cult escaped, a woman named Cindy. She had been beaten so badly over the years that she had completely lost the hearing in one of her ears. And one day she decided that she had had enough, and like Leanne, she escaped and never returned. So 2 members had now successfully fled the cult. And this made other members of the collective question how powerful Bala really was, because he had been preaching all of these years that he could kill any one of them with a single thought. But the women were starting to think, but if these 2 other women have escaped, and they escaped and they're completely fine, how powerful is Bala? After years of manipulation and brainwashing, Sean finally started to open her eyes. This was now December of 1996. Katie was currently 14 years old, and Sean was finally seeing through Bala's BS and seeing him for what he really was. She finally started to see all of the contradictions in his teachings, in everything that he was saying. And one day she just went up to him and said, if you're immortal, if you're God, why are you aging? And you can all imagine that Bala did not take too kindly to this. Huge arguments broke out between Bala and Sean, and as you can imagine, a lot of violence took place as well. One time, Katie found Sean completely tied up. Her hands, her feet tied up, she was gagged. And apparently Bala said that he did this because Sean had tried to escape. And then things calmed down. Bala untied Sean. Everyone thought, okay, everything's over now, it's all calm. Everyone went to bed. But the very next day, Katie heard screaming coming from the back garden. And Katie rushed out to find an absolutely horrific scene. Sean's body was lying there, crumpled on the concrete floor. Sean had fallen from an upstairs bathroom window. Her neck was broken and there was thick blood oozing from her head. Bella told someone to call an ambulance, and then he said, quote, "Don't touch her. It might be used as evidence. Someone might say we pushed her." And I know what you're all thinking, because I'm thinking it too. Yes, I am. It's like, why would you say that? Why would you say that unless you pushed her? So Sian was rushed to hospital. Apparently Bella was all of a sudden okay with her going to the hospital. The doctors treated her and Sian was paralysed from the neck down. Sian was kept in hospital for months, and at this point Katie had started to figure out that Sian might be her birth mother. She'd actually come across her birth certificate, and on the certificate it said that Sian was her mother. Bella had told Katie though that that document was fake and to not believe it. However, Katie, she's now 14. She's not stupid, you know? She's not believing everything that Bella is saying anymore, and she is starting to figure out things. And Sian is in the hospital right now. She is literally clinging to her life, and Katie at this point doesn't think that she's ever going to see Sian again, who she's just figured out is her birth mother. But amazingly, Katie is allowed to visit Sian. And when the visit is over and it's time for Katie to leave, Katie plucks up the courage to say something to Sian, even though she knows that Bella is not going to like it and she's probably going to pay for it when she gets home. But Katie says to Sian, "Bye-bye, mommy." And at that exact moment, Katie said that she saw something in Sian's eyes. She saw love for the first time. Sian's whole composure completely changed, and in response Sian said, "Bye-bye, baby." In that moment, Katie was filled with questions. She wanted to scream, "Are you my mother?" But tragically, Katie was never able to ask that question. She was whisked out of that room before she could even get another word out, and 5 days later Sian fell into a coma, eventually passing away. And Katie would never see Sian, who was her birth mother, ever again. The police did investigate Sian's death, but because Sian was actually in the hospital for 7 months, and because so much time had passed from her initial injuries, it was impossible for the police to determine whether she jumped or whether she was pushed. So Sian's death was ruled as an accident. I definitely have my suspicions. I don't have my suspicions. I believe that he pushed her. Sian was trying to escape. Obviously, it is very plausible for someone in her situation to want an out. Any way possible, she wants to get out. Bella literally had Sian tied up the day before. Then an argument broke out, and apparently she fell out of a window. And then the first thing he says is, "Don't touch her. It could be used as evidence. Someone might say we pushed her." Who says that if you haven't pushed them? I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I am not buying that it was an accidental death. No way. But if you thought one suspicious death was bad enough, well, it doesn't end there. And this happened just 4 years later. A woman named O fell in the kitchen. Suspicious. And when she had fallen over, she had hit her head and she was severely injured, and she begged Bella to allow her to see a doctor. But Bella refused. Bella would not let her see a doctor, and the next day she tragically passed away. She had suffered a stroke from her injuries. It is reported that she died of natural causes, and no police investigation was ever done. So that is now 2 perfectly healthy adults suspiciously dying in the cult in a relatively short space of time, and no one was asking questions. More and more time has passed, and Katie is now in her 20s, and I feel like we just need to stop and pause for a moment and remind ourselves that she is 20 years old, but this has been her whole life since birth. And the older Katie got, the more she started to question the world around her. Now, Katie was given one luxury in life, and that was reading. She had been given a limited set of books, and she devoured them. She loved reading. She read pretty much anything that she could get her hands on. It was her only form of escape ever. And then when Katie was in her 20s, Bella allowed her to read the Harry Potter series and the Lord of the Rings series. Bella had granted Katie this luxury because he strongly identified with Harry Potter and also Aragorn. It's like, really, Bella? You're choosing Harry Potter, who I suppose you could call the chosen one, and then Aragorn, the rightful king of Gondor. You couldn't be further from the two. Okay, and Katie agreed. When she read the Harry Potter series and the Lord of the Rings series, she actually thought that Bella was more like Voldemort and Sauron. And once Katie had started to question Bella in her mind, it opened up a whole new world to her. She finally realized that she doesn't want to be a part of this. She doesn't need to be a part of this, and that she wanted to get out. So at the age of 22, Katie made her first escape. And this took an absolute enormous amount of mental strength. But somehow Katie managed to flee through the back door and Bella didn't notice. And Katie, being in the outside world, was absolutely terrified. She had never known this world. She had always been told that the outside world was evil. She literally had no clue what to do, but she spotted a passerby who thankfully wanted to help her. Katie was like, please, please, please help me. And the passerby pointed her to a police station. And then when Katie got to the police station, she didn't know how to articulate herself. She didn't know how to explain her situation. But Katie also didn't want to get Bella in trouble. She just wanted to get out of there. So Katie, being at the police station, all she could say was, I've ran away from home. And unfortunately, the escape didn't exactly go to plan, because the police, after hearing Katie just say, I ran away from home, phoned Bella up to come and collect her. But it's just so heartbreaking that she finally gathered the strength, the mental strength to leave, because obviously she was so terrified of the outside world. She had left, and within an hour, she was back at the house. And unfortunately, Katie would spend another 8 years in that house before she ever tried to escape again. The failure of the first escape had really hit her hard, and she fell into a really deep depression after this. But there was actually a huge significant event that happened to Katie during these 8 years, and that is that she got a boyfriend. I know, you're probably thinking, how the hell did this happen? Because Katie is under all of these strict rules and regulations and everything. Well, after she escaped the first time, Bella started to worry a little bit that she was going to escape again. So he did loosen the reins a little bit on Katie. He gave her a little bit more freedom. And by giving her a little bit more freedom, I literally mean she wasn't monitored 24/7. She still wasn't allowed to leave the house. She still had to do all of that 10-step routine and everything every day, but she just wasn't monitored every second of every day. One of her neighbours was a man named Roddy, and he would see Katie sometimes at the window. And him living next door, he would pass secret letters to her from his window. And they started to communicate through letters, and before long, Katie was sneaking Roddy into her bedroom at night. And Katie completely fell in love with Roddy. Being with Roddy was the first time Katie had ever experienced love, companionship, and it wasn't long before Katie fell pregnant. And this was music to Katie's ears, because she finally felt like she had something to live for, that she had a purpose. But one night when Roddy was in Katie's room, Bella walked in and everything fell apart. Bella completely lost it. He threatened to kill Roddy if he ever returned to the house. And then after Roddy left, Bella beat Katie up so severely that she had a miscarriage, which is just honestly heartbreaking. It's horrible to even think of that happening. And Katie and Roddy obviously didn't really see each other after this moment, because Katie was terrified. And this part of the story is honestly so tragic, because Katie finally was happy, you know, and Bella has taken that away from her. And he's also murdered her unborn baby. And obviously this had a massive impact on Katie, because she just felt like everything had been taken away from her. But eventually Katie did try and escape again, and this time her attempt was successful. So it's now 2013. It's crazy, isn't it, that this happened literally in modern times. So it's 2013 and Katie is now 30 years old. And her and the other members of the collective were given a new privilege, and that was watching TV. So one day, Katie and another woman, Josie, were watching the news and they saw a number appear on the screen that was a domestic abuse helpline. Katie was actually really ill at this point. She had undiagnosed diabetes and she was losing a drastic amount of weight. Katie begged Josie to remember the number and phone the helpline to get Katie help. And miraculously, Josie agreed to help her. And they made the call. And when the responders on the other end of the line heard what was going on in this house, that women were being held captive in just a random house in London, they sprung into action to save Katie and the other women. The police got Katie, Josie, and the third remaining member of the collective, which was a woman named Aisha. They got them out of the house and into protective custody. The police stormed the house and Aravindan Balakrishna was finally arrested after getting away with abuse, torture, imprisonment for decades. And I'm not sure how many of you saw that coming, but we kind of have a happy ending to this case, even though this case was absolutely horrific. But there is somewhat of a happy ending because Katie managed to escape. And when the story of this cult finally broke in the media, people were so shocked. I mean, there was this cult operating for decades just in a house in London on a busy street.
3 women who claim they've been held as slaves in a home in London for at least 30 years have been rescued by the police.
A 69-year-old from Malaysia, a 57-year-old from Ireland, and a 30-year-old British woman were all rescued. All 3 women were highly traumatised and were taken to a place of safety where they remain. We have seen some cases where people have been held for up to 10 years, but we have never seen anything of this magnitude before. Thank you.
How could it be possible that this man was holding so many women captive in the middle of a busy neighbourhood? How can this child, who is now an adult, have just gone completely under the radar? How did they slip through the cracks?
Curtains were never opened at any time at all, front or back of house. The only time you would see them was sometimes at the back when the little girl she would turn around and pop the head up, pop back down again.
Is it disturbing to you, Peter, to think that there was a child being held captive next door?
I mean, as I'm talking to yourself now, it's actually bringing a lump to the throat. It's just the thought of what that child has gone through. At the time, I just didn't do anything about it. I mean, and I'm so sorry that I didn't. Again, I didn't know what was happening, but if I did, I definitely would have done something about it.
The case finally went to trial and Bala was charged with child cruelty, false imprisonment, 4 counts of rape and indecent assaults. At the trial, the 2 women that have managed to escape the cult, which was Leanne and Cindy, did take the stand to tell everyone just what happened in that cult. They gave harrowing accounts of how Bala would sexually assault them, he would rape them on a weekly basis. But most bravely of all, Katie also took the stand. She was forced to recount the horrific ordeal of the past 30 years of her whole life. And even though she was absolutely terrified that no one would believe her, because it is a crazy story, when you hear this, it is almost unbelievable, but the jury were completely on her side. And Aravindan Balakrishnan was found guilty and sentenced to 23 years in prison. And side note, the suspicious deaths of Sean and O were never investigated. Bala was never charged with anything to do with their deaths. Regardless of what you say, he is responsible for their deaths because O died from a stroke, and if she had received medical attention, there is a good chance that she wouldn't have died. And Sean was either pushed from a window or she had jumped herself. Again, if she wasn't in the cult, if she was allowed to leave, she wouldn't have jumped from the window. So regardless of how you look at it, he is responsible for their deaths. In the aftermath, all 3 women, Katie, Josie and Aisha, had to figure out how to rebuild their lives. For Katie, this process would be much harder because she didn't know anything about the outside world. She literally had 0 experience of living independently, of living outside of the cult. And when Katie first escaped, the people that were helping her rebuild her life said that she had the mental capacity of around 10 years old. And she was 30, but her ability to do day-to-day tasks like just cooking, cleaning, general just looking after yourself. Her mental age was even lower at around 6 or 7. But she has had amazing help from dedicated charity services, and thankfully Katie has rebuilt her life. She has been able to reclaim some of the things that Bella had taken away from her. She was able to get an education. She actually went to university. She was even able to reconnect with Sean's mother, so her biological grandmother. Katie finally feels like she actually has a family now. Katie now lives in Leeds in the UK in a flat independently, and she often talks openly about her experience in the cult, hoping that her story will help others.
For 30 years, trapped in a house, part of a cult, brainwashed, imprisoned, told that if you do things wrong, there will be natural disasters outside. What was that like? What on earth was your childhood like?
Well, not even my relatives, not even my family knew I existed. No, not go to school, not even on the list of the people living in the house. So I used to think that I would be, if I had died, or if my father had killed me in rage, I'd just have been buried in the garden, and I'd have died without even ever having lived, without leaving a footprint on the earth.
Locked away in a small bedroom, Katie has now decided to waive her anonymity to help her reclaim her place in a world she was denied. Even crossing a road alone is a new skill.
At first I couldn't find my way around. I just get lost even walking down the road because everything is so big and it's just so enormous after spending all my life looking at 4 walls, basically. Nelson Mandela said about if you leave the prison with hatred and anger and bitterness, then you're still in prison. I felt like a caged bird with clipped wings, but now I feel that I'm learning to fly.
And I have seen a lot of footage of Katie, many interviews, and it's honestly so crazy to think what she went through. And it's absolutely incredible to see what she's been able to achieve after the cult. She is incredibly put together, she's so eloquent, and she is so strong, and she's also full of hope and happiness. She doesn't want to hold on to any anger or hatred. She just wants to move on with her life. And Katie actually also published a book on her experience in the cult. It's called The Girl in the Shadows, My Life in a Cult. And it's so brilliantly written. It's an incredible story. It was the book that I used a lot for my research on this case, and I highly recommend that you all go read that book. Go out, get that book, support Katie. It is an incredible book. So that is the story of Katie Morgan Davis. Let's end it on her because she is incredibly strong and I wish her all the best. I hope that she is just thriving because she deserves it. And just one final note, on the 8th of April 2022, at the age of 81, Aravindan Balakrishnan died in prison. And when the news stories broke about his death, that was the first time I heard about this case. And when I started looking into this case, I was honestly just shocked. My jaw hit the ground because I was just like, how do I not know about this story? How was this cult operating in the UK in secret for 40 years? And I'm now only just finding out about it. So yeah, I literally heard about it when he died on the 8th of April, and I had to bring you this story straight away because honestly, Katie's story needed to be heard and I wanted to bring it to you guys. So yes, that is the end of today's video. If you are still here, thank you so much because that was a hell of a long video and I appreciate you all so much. I really do. So let me know your thoughts, theories and opinions, especially about the suspicious deaths. Like, I want to know, do you think he was responsible? Do you think he pushed Sean? Do you think he pushed O in the kitchen? Let me know because I do. As always, leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below. I always want to know what you want to hear next, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.